Some ancient places look ordinary until you stand closer: a mound that hides a pyramid, a cliff that holds a face, a statue that reacts to magnets, or a stone chamber built with precision that doesn't match its age. Across deserts, forests, and mountains, there are structures that were clearly made with purpose, but the purpose isn't fully understood anymore. In this series, we look at each site slowly and clearly, what the evidence shows, what the builders might have intended, and why these places still raise questions, even after years of research. Every chapter reveals one quiet detail that changes how the site is understood: the giant coffins of El Asasif. In the western desert valley, behind Luxor, beyond the long ramps of the mortuary temples and the silent hills of the Theban necropolis, archaeologists opened a shaft in 2019 that revealed one of the most unexpected finds in recent Egyptian history. Inside a deep rectangular pit at El Asasif, they uncovered more than 30 massive wooden coffins, perfectly sealed, vividly painted, and arranged with a level of care that suggested they had not been disturbed since the day they were placed there. The discovery offered a rare glimpse into burial practices of the 22nd dynasty and raised questions about how so many large coffins ended up hidden together in a shaft that had gone unnoticed for thousands of years. The coffins were stacked in 2 layers, one on top of another, forming tight rows that filled the shaft almost completely. Some were positioned horizontally, others vertically, but all showed signs of deliberate placement. The wood, strengthened by layers of plaster and protective paint, had survived remarkably well. When archaeologists lifted the first coffin, they found that the ceiling remained intact, a rare condition in a region where most tombs were plundered centuries ago. Each coffin was decorated with bright colors: deep reds, blues, greens, and black outlines surrounding hieroglyphic texts and protective symbols. Faces were painted with calm expressions, the hands crossed in the typical posture of the period, and the surfaces showed repeated motifs of deities associated with protection in the afterlife. The preservation of the pigments suggested that the coffins had been protected from moisture and human interference since the late 1st millennium BCE. The location of the shaft added to the mystery. El Asasif lies between Deir el-Bahari and the Ramesseum, an area filled with tombs belonging to high priests, officials, and elite families. The coffins uncovered in 2019 do not belong to royalty, but they were clearly part of an organized burial event. This raises a significant question. Why were so many individuals buried together in a single, hidden shaft during a period when individual tombs were the norm? Archaeologists propose that the burials were part of a family lineage, possibly a group of priests or administrators linked to the Temple of Amun. Many coffins bear the titles Priest of Amun, Singer of the Temple, or Servant of the God's House. These titles suggest that the individuals may have belonged to a professional community associated with temple service. The collective burial may have been a protective measure during a time of political turbulence, when large family tombs were vulnerable to looting. The coffins themselves reveal significant details about woodworking and painting techniques of the period. The wooden surfaces were carved, plastered, and then polished before receiving layers of pigment. The hieroglyphic texts follow a consistent format, indicating that they were produced by trained artisans working in a workshop with standardized procedures. The uniformity of style across many coffins suggests mass production within a specialized craft tradition, not in a mechanical sense, but in a coordinated workshop environment with shared methods and artistic conventions. When some of the coffins were opened under controlled conditions, mummies inside showed varying levels of preservation. Wrappings remained intact, amulets were placed between layers of linen, and resin-coated surfaces preserved anatomical details. These clues help archaeologists understand embalming practices in the Third Intermediate period, when techniques varied significantly depending on availability of resources and ritual expectations. The shaft itself was narrow, just wide enough to lower the coffins one by one. Its depth suggests that the burial was intended to remain hidden. Unlike monumental tombs carved into rock, this shaft had no decorated walls, no passages, and no chamber. It served a single purpose: to store the coffins in a protected underground space. This simplicity contrasts sharply with the complexity of the coffins, highlighting a distinction between the physical structure of the burial and the symbolic preparation of the deceased. The discovery also tells a story about community and belief. The individuals buried at El Asasif may not have been wealthy enough for large tombs, but they belonged to an institution that valued ritual, continuity, and group identity. The collective burial shows that people of similar status or profession were united not only in life, but in death. This concept of shared burial within a social group is well attested in Theban necropolis traditions, but rarely preserved on this scale. From an archaeological perspective, the find is important because the coffins remained untouched. Looting has erased context from many ancient burials. Here, the arrangement, placement, sealing, and organic remains were all preserved exactly as they were left. This allows researchers to study coffin construction, burial sequence, resin composition, and textile wrapping without the distortions caused by intrusion or removal. The find also highlights the logistics of burial preparation during the 22nd dynasty. Creating more than 30 large coffins required organized labor: carpenters, plasterers, painters, scribes, and embalmers. The process would have taken months. The coordinated burial suggests a planned event, possibly carried out over a short period, rather than decades of individual interments. Standing at the shaft today, the scale of the discovery becomes clear. The pit is quiet, with smooth-cut walls leading down to the space where the coffins once rested. The air inside still carries the faint smell of ancient resins and wood, reminders of the hands that prepared each coffin long before modern archaeologists arrived. The giant coffins of El Asif are not monumental in size compared to stone sarcophagi, but they are monumental in context. They capture a moment in Egyptian history where burial traditions shifted, where community identity played a greater role, and where the need for protection from looting shaped how the dead were placed underground. The discovery provides a rare, intact snapshot of a burial practice mostly lost to time. It reveals not only how people were buried, but how they lived as members of a structured community that valued ritual, continuity, and the presence of their dead in a shared sacred landscape. The giant granite jars of Laos, across the rolling hills and grasslands of northern Laos, lies a landscape that feels both open and strangely marked. Scattered across hundreds of square kilometers are enormous stone jars, some standing upright, others tilted or half-buried, carved from single blocks of granite, sandstone, or conglomerate. Many stand between 2 and 3 meters tall. Some weigh several tons. Their arrangement across wide plateaus gives the impression of a site planned with purpose, yet the builders remain unknown, and the meaning behind these massive vessels is still debated. The region is known today as the Plain of Jars, a name that describes the scene accurately but does not explain it. Archaeologists estimate that thousands of jars exist across more than 90 separate sites. Some locations contain only a handful, others hold dozens or even hundreds. Each jar is carved with a hollow interior, usually cylindrical, with thick walls and flat bases. The openings are wide. Lids, when found, are rare. The jars stand silently under open skies, exposed to weather, their surfaces worn by centuries of rain and wind. Dating these jars has proven difficult. Organic material is scarce, and the stone itself provides no clear indication of origin. Excavations around several sites reveal that the jars were likely created during the Iron Age, between 500 BCE and 500 CE, but the exact timeline varies depending on which cluster is examined. What remains consistent is that the jars represent a cultural effort spanning many generations, involving substantial labor and a tradition of stoneworking that must have been well established. The jars' enormous size has prompted questions about how they were transported. Many are made from stone quarried several kilometers away, in locations that require steep climbs or difficult river crossings. Without wheeled carts, roads, or draft animals suited to heavy hauling, moving multi-ton vessels would have required coordinated human labor. Researchers propose that workers slid the jars on wooden rollers or dragged them with ropes, stopping periodically to reposition supports. The effort would have involved dozens of people, sustained over long distances and terrain that changes unpredictably. The shaping process was equally demanding. Granite and sandstone are tough materials, requiring patient, repetitive work with iron tools. Each jar appears to have been carved from a single block, suggesting that carvers first reduced the stone into a rough cylinder before hollowing out the interior. The smoothness of the walls varies from site to site, reflecting differences in craftsmanship or available tools. Traces of pick marks, chisel scars, and grinding lines are still visible on many jars, offering a direct look at the techniques used. The purpose of the jars remains one of the central questions. The earliest interpretations propose that the jars were used for storage, perhaps grain, water, or fermentation. But archaeological evidence has shifted the discussion. Excavations at burial sites reveal human remains, beads, pottery, and charred bone fragments buried near or inside some jars. This suggests that the jars were part of a mortuary tradition, potentially used for secondary burial, where human remains were placed inside the jars after initial decomposition elsewhere. Further research indicates that some jars may have been used as temporary containers during funerary rituals. Bodies may have been placed inside the vessels until the natural environment reduced them to bone, after which the remains were moved to smaller burial pits nearby. Other jars may have served as markers rather than containers, representing ritual spaces rather than functional vessels. The wide distribution of jar sites indicates a cultural landscape rather than a single ceremonial center. Each cluster likely served a local community, with the jars arranged in patterns that reflect social or ritual significance. Some sites sit on high plateaus overlooking valleys, suggesting that visibility and elevation mattered. Others lie near ancient trade routes or river systems. The placement appears deliberate, but without written records, the meaning behind the landscape remains interpreted through physical evidence alone. The plain of jars also reveals the extent of ancient settlement in this region. Fragments of pottery, tools, and habitation remains found near certain sites show that communities lived near the jars and maintained them as part of their cultural practices. The effort required to shape and transport these vessels suggests organized labor, leadership structures, and shared beliefs, a level of social complexity sometimes overlooked in this part of Southeast Asia's prehistoric record. One challenge facing archaeologists is the modern history of the region. During the 20th century, the area became heavily affected by conflict, leaving unexploded ordnance scattered across the landscape. This has limited excavation and mapping, slowing research and leaving many sites unexplored. Despite these obstacles, ongoing work continues to reveal new details about the jar's construction, alignments, and associated burial practices. Some jars include carvings or surface marks that differ from the majority. A few lids bear simple geometric designs. One jar at Site 1 has a human figure etched onto its side, a rare decorative element that raises questions about whether some jars held special roles or belonged to particular lineages or traditions. These variations suggest that the jar-making tradition was not uniform but adapted across regions, communities, and generations. The quiet mystery surrounding the giant granite jars of Laos comes from this combination of physical permanence and cultural silence. The jars are immovable, durable, and visible across the landscape, yet they reveal little about the people who shaped them. They stand in open fields without inscriptions, temples, or settlements that clearly define their purpose. Their meaning must be reconstructed through evidence scattered across the terrain: shards of pottery, bone fragments, quarry sites, and the scars left by tools. Walking among the jars today, the scale feels disproportionate to the stillness. Some jars tilt as if time has pushed them gently aside. Others stand upright, facing the horizon. The grass grows around them, the wind moves quietly across the hills, and the jars remain exactly where ancient hands placed them. The physicality is impressive, but the unanswered questions add weight. Who organized the effort? What beliefs drove the construction? And why did the tradition last as long as it did? The giant granite jars of Laos represent a cultural achievement that combined engineering, ritual, and landscape planning. They show that societies without writing or monumental architecture still developed large-scale traditions that required skill, cooperation, and long-term cultural memory. Their silence is not emptiness, it is the gap left when physical objects outlast the stories that created them. The earth-buried pyramids of Anta, Peru. In the high valleys of the Peruvian Andes, where farmland stretches across gentle slopes and low hills rise in quiet patterns, archaeologists have identified something unusual beneath the soil: large mound-like formations that were once assumed to be natural terrain. But recent investigations around Anta, west of Cusco, reveal that several of these hills are not natural at all. They are ancient pyramidal mounds, long ago covered by earth, vegetation, and agricultural fields, hiding massive stone chambers and architectural elements still preserved beneath the surface. The discovery did not begin with excavation. It began with patterns, subtle alignments in aerial surveys, soil anomalies, and the presence of oversized stones embedded in terrace walls that did not match the local geology. Farmers had occasionally uncovered shaped stones while plowing, but the pieces were dismissed as remnants of old Inca or pre-Inca field structures. Only when archaeologists conducted systematic mapping did the scale become clear. What looked like rolling farmland was, in fact, the eroded outline of monumental constructions. The buried mounds at Anta are not pyramids in the Egyptian sense, but they share essential characteristics: artificially raised structures built from stone, earth, and fill, containing internal chambers and architectural features. Their size varies, but some stand more than 10 meters high and span dozens of meters across. Their slopes have softened through centuries of erosion, but beneath the surface, regular stonework patterns remain. Excavation of selected test pits revealed large, cut, and fitted stones, forming walls that once enclosed chambers or passageways. Some stones weigh several tons, shaped through techniques involving hammerstones and abrasion. The masonry differs from Inca imperial style. It is rougher in finish, but deliberate in its placement, resembling constructions from earlier highland cultures that predate the rise of Cusco's urban center. Stratigraphic analysis suggests that parts of these structures belong to the pre-Wari and early highland cultural phases, potentially between 500 BCE and 500 CE. This period saw the rise of regional societies that built ceremonial platforms, burial complexes, and administrative centers across the Andes. The Anta mounds appear to fit within this tradition, monumental constructions that supported ritual or communal activity long before the Inca Empire consolidated power. One of the most intriguing features identified beneath the soil is the presence of stone-lined chambers. These chambers, located several meters below the mound surface, are built from large blocks, arranged in rectangular or slightly trapezoidal layouts. The walls lean inward slightly, suggesting that they once supported corbelled or timbered roofs. Some chambers contain niches carved into the stone, similar to early Andean ceremonial architecture. The presence of these chambers raises immediate questions about function. They may have served as burial areas, storage spaces for ritual offerings, or chambers used for seasonal ceremonies tied to agriculture, astronomy, or ancestral veneration. In Andean tradition, monumental earth and stone platforms often served as a meeting point between the living and their ancestors, a symbolic threshold where offerings were placed and rituals conducted. The mounds at Anta also show evidence of terracing, suggesting that builders shaped the slopes into stepped levels. Although erosion has blurred their edges, ground-penetrating radar reveals parallel layers of compacted earth and stone that once formed deliberate structural tiers. This terracing would have given the mounds a stepped appearance when they were active, similar to platform pyramids found in other Andean cultures. The fact that these structures were buried intentionally or allowed to be reclaimed by the landscape raises additional questions. Some mounds may have been decommissioned through ritual closure, a practice seen in many Andean societies, where ceremonial buildings were intentionally sealed when their function ended. Others may simply have been abandoned and gradually covered by sediment, vegetation, and agricultural activity over centuries. The surrounding region offers more clues. Nearby settlements show evidence of long-term habitation: ceramics, grinding stones, terraces, and irrigation channels. These traces suggest that large communities lived in the area and likely participated in ceremonies or gatherings associated with the mounds. The placement of the structures, often on elevated ground with broad views, indicates that visibility and landscape integration were important. The mounds connect visually to sacred mountains, water sources, and celestial horizons, consistent with Andean cosmology. The buried pyramids also reflect a broader pattern of monumental architecture across Peru's highlands. Similar platform mounds have been identified in regions around Huaro, Andahuaylilas, and the Vilcanota Valley. These constructions show that long before the Inca, communities built large-scale ceremonial centers using techniques that required coordinated labor and architectural planning. What makes Anta unique is how completely its structures disappeared beneath farmland. Generations of residents built terraces over them, unaware of the monuments below. Only faint patterns of stone outcrops and unusual soil densities hinted at the ancient presence. The rediscovery of these mounds is a reminder that even in landscapes shaped by centuries of agriculture, the past can remain hidden just beneath the surface. Standing on the mounds today, the site feels deceptively ordinary. The surface is quiet grass, crops, and low earthen contours. Yet a few meters below lie the remains of chambers and platforms carefully arranged by hands from a forgotten community. The weight of earth above them makes the structures feel distant, but their forms remain intact enough to reconstruct the outlines of the original architecture. The earth-buried pyramids of Anta show how ancient monumental traditions can survive in unexpected ways, not as towering ruins but as muted shapes beneath farmland. They reveal that the Andes were a place of complex, organized societies long before the rise of imperial states. They also remind us that archaeology often depends on subtle details, soil texture, stone alignment, and buried geometry, rather than visible walls or sculptures. These mounds, hidden for centuries, now open a window into a world where ritual, landscape, and architecture were tightly connected. Their quiet presence beneath the ground reflects the endurance of ancient cultural memory preserved not in towering monuments, but in the earth itself. The megalithic halls of Sogmatar, Turkey. In the dry plateau lands of southeastern Turkey, far from major cities and surrounded by low, eroded hills, lies a site known as Sogmatar, a place that appears at first like scattered ruins and broken stone. But beneath the simple landscape is a complex ritual center that once served as a hub for sun worship, planetary cults, and local kingship traditions. The site contains open-air temples, inscribed rock faces, sacred hills, and, most strikingly, a set of underground megalithic stone halls carved directly into the bedrock. These chambers, quiet and shadowed, still bear the marks of ancient religious gatherings that took place here nearly 2,000 years ago. Sogmatar was not a city in the traditional sense. There were no monumental palaces or large residential districts. Instead, it functioned as a ritual landscape, a place where priests, local rulers, and pilgrims gathered to perform ceremonies connected to the sun, the moon, and the 7 classical planets. The site reached its peak during the 2nd century CE, when local kings, under the influence of the Osroene kingdom, controlled the region. But the roots of its cult activity stretch much earlier, into pre-Roman and pre-Hellenistic periods. The most prominent feature of Sogmatar is the central hill, known as the Sacred Hill, or Sun Hill. From the top, the surrounding plain is visible in all directions. Around the summit are shallow carvings, altars, and inscriptions in Syriac and Aramaic. These inscriptions refer to the Lord of the universe and describe offerings made to the sun. The alignment of the hill and surrounding features suggests that the site played a role in celestial observation or seasonal rituals linked to the movement of the sun across the horizon. But the quiet mystery of Sogmatar lies underground. On the slopes of the hill and in nearby outcrops, archaeologists identified several carved chambers connected by short passages. These chambers are not simple caves. They are carved into geometric halls with high ceilings, straight walls, and recessed niches. The precision of the carving indicates intentional design rather than opportunistic excavation. Inside the chambers, the walls are smooth, with large flat surfaces shaped with steady tools. Some walls display unfinished carving marks, showing the method of creation, repeated chiseling that follows straight lines, gradually removing stone to form flat planes. Niches carved into the walls were likely used for lamps, ritual objects, or offerings. The floors are level and intentionally cleared, indicating that gatherings took place inside. These underground halls raise immediate questions about their purpose. Their construction required considerable labor, involving the removal of tons of stone and the shaping of interior spaces meant to accommodate groups of people. The absence of burial structures suggests that the chambers were not tombs. Instead, they appear to have served as ritual rooms, possibly for initiations, celestial rites, or ceremonies requiring privacy or controlled acoustics. Acoustics is an important detail. Sound behaves differently inside carved stone chambers. Even quiet speech can echo with clarity. In ancient ritual contexts, this amplification may have enhanced chants or prayers. Combined with lamp niches and limited light, these halls could create an atmosphere suited for religious performance. The architectural style of the Sogmatar chambers differs from local, domestic, or defensive structures. Instead, they resemble underground ritual chambers found in parts of Mesopotamia and northern Syria, where star-worshipping communities performed rites in enclosed spaces. This connection places Sogmatar within a broader tradition of astral cults groups that viewed the sky as a living system of deities, each influencing human affairs. The surrounding region of Sogmatar provides further context. Scattered around the central hill are 7 smaller hilltop shrines, each associated symbolically with one of the 7 classical planets, the sun, moon, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, Mercury, and Mars. These hills likely formed a ritual circuit, with priests or pilgrims moving between them during ceremonies. The underground halls could have served as enclosed sanctuaries linked to these open-air shrines. Inscriptions at the site mention local rulers known as Marilaha, or Lords of the Gods, who performed religious functions in addition to administrative duties. This suggests that political authority in Sogmatar was tied closely to ritual leadership. The underground chambers may have been part of this leadership system spaces, reserved for elite ceremonies or gatherings of priests. Despite its significance, Sogmatar's megalithic halls were not widely known until recent surveys and excavations brought attention to them. The region's remote location and limited historical documentation contributed to the site's obscurity. Even today, many parts of Sogmatar remain lightly studied, with some chambers partially filled with soil or debris. The survival of the underground halls is due largely to their construction. Carved directly from bedrock, they resisted erosion. Their entrances, often narrow and discreet, protected them from extensive damage. Inside, the air is cool, the surface is stable, and the walls retain tool marks that allow archaeologists to reconstruct the carving process. The chambers also reveal the intersection of landscape and religion. Sogmatar's placement within a natural basin, surrounded by low hills, creates a sense of enclosure suited for sacred gatherings. The central hill dominates the horizon, while the underground spaces offer inward-focused environments. This duality, open sky above, carved silence below, mirrors many ancient cosmologies, where heaven and earth were connected through ritual practice. Standing inside one of the megalithic halls today, the atmosphere is quiet and controlled. The ceilings rise above in uneven but deliberate curves. Light from a lamp or flashlight reveals flat wall surfaces that widen into corners, shaped with surprising precision, given the tools available at the time. The sense of purpose is clear, even if the specific rituals remain unknown. The megalithic halls of Sogmatar represent a cultural tradition that blended astronomy, religion, and community identity. They show that even without monumental architecture, societies of the ancient Near East created significant ritual landscapes through earth, stone, and celestial symbolism. Their underground spaces reflect a sophisticated understanding of how architecture can shape ritual experience through sound, light, and movement. The site remains partly unexplored, its chambers holding only faint clues. But the overall picture is clear. Sogmatar was a place where people gathered to honor the sun, the planets, and the cycles of the sky, and the megalithic halls were part of that sacred system, preserved through the stability of stone and the silence of time. The stone giants of Qasr al-Ab Jordan, in the green basin of Wadi as-Sur, west of modern Amman, stands a structure that feels out of place in both scale and style. Known today as Qasr al-Abd, it is a monumental limestone building rising from a low valley floor, built from blocks so large that they appear oversized even among the region's Hellenistic architecture. Its massive walls, carved animal reliefs, and multi-story layout suggest a palace or elite residence. Yet the building's purpose, its unfinished features, and its unusual engineering have left archaeologists with questions that still surround this isolated structure. Qasr al-Abd dates to the early 2nd century BCE and is associated with the Tobiad family, a powerful local dynasty operating during the Hellenistic period. At a time when Greek influence merged with the long traditions of the Levant, the palace stands within a larger estate area, once surrounded by a water system, making the building appear as if it rose from a shallow artificial lake. Its reflection would have doubled its visual impact, turning an already large building into an imposing landmark. The palace is built almost entirely from huge limestone blocks, many weighing several tons. These stones were shaped with flat, precise faces and fitted with tight seams. The lower level consists of massive rectangular chambers, supported by thick walls, while the upper level, partially collapsed once, included additional rooms, balconies, or galleries. Some stones still bear lifting marks, showing how builders maneuvered them using ropes, levers, and support scaffolding. The craftsmanship is consistent across the structure. The exterior blocks were smoothed and aligned, while the interior surfaces show more functional shaping. This indicates that the building was designed with both structural strength and outward appearance in mind. Its walls rise much higher than typical domestic architecture of the region, giving Qasr al-Abd an imposing presence even in its damaged state. One of the most distinctive features is the carved animal reliefs found on the exterior. Lions, panthers, eagles, and other animals appear in large sculpted panels integrated into the stone blocks. Some are carved in high relief, emerging almost fully from the wall. These animals are not purely decorative. They reflect symbols associated with local elite identity, power, and protection. The lions in particular may represent guardianship, positioned as if to watch over the estate. The monumental scale of Qasr al-Abd has prompted questions about its function. While often referred to as a palace, no clear administrative areas or defensive features are present. Instead, the building appears to blend residential, ceremonial, and symbolic elements. Its location in a secluded valley suggests that it served as a private estate or retreat for its builders rather than a governmental center. One theory proposes that Qasr al-Abd was part of a forting Resig larger water-based landscape. Archaeological evidence shows channels, embankments, and remains of retaining structures around the site. When filled with water, these features would have created a reflective basin around the building. The palace would have appeared almost like an island, a visual effect consistent with elite Hellenistic design, where water, grandeur, and symmetry played important roles. Despite the effort invested in the building, parts of Qasr al-Abd remain unfinished. Some blocks show incomplete smoothing, and certain sculptural elements stop abruptly. This suggests that construction was interrupted, possibly due to political shifts, financial difficulties, or the collapse of the Tobiad family's influence. The unfinished state adds to the site's mystery, leaving questions about what the completed palace would have looked like. Inside the building, the layout reveals a focus on symmetry and long rectangular chambers. The walls of the lower level are thick, enough to support a massive second story. Window openings and door frames carved directly into the stone blocks indicate careful planning. The lower rooms may have served as storage areas, workshops, or functional spaces, while the upper levels likely housed reception halls or living quarters. The engineering behind the structure is significant. Builders used large stone blocks in a style reminiscent of megalithic construction, but with Hellenistic architectural planning. The combination of these two approaches, large, heavy stones used in a refined architectural layout, sets Qasr al-Abd apart from other regional buildings of the time. It shows that the builders had access to skilled labor, organized logistics, and an architectural vision that went beyond standard local traditions. The presence of carved animals adds an artistic dimension not commonly seen in Jordanian stone architecture of this period. Some of these carvings appear near openings that may have served as water spouts, enhancing the palace's visual impact when water flowed through the system. Others seem purely symbolic, integrated into the stone as guardians or emblems tied to family identity. Archaeological surveys around the site indicate that Qasr al-Abd was part of a larger estate, including workshops, smaller structures, and agricultural installations. The scale of the building suggests that its owners controlled considerable land and resources. The estate may have included vineyards, orchards, or grain production elements common in elite rural estates of the Hellenistic world. Yet the building's isolation raises questions. It does not sit near a major city, nor does it appear connected to a defensive network or trade hub. Instead, its purpose seems to have been symbolic and personal, a demonstration of wealth, craftsmanship, and architectural ambition. In this way, Qasr al-Abd stands as an expression of the identity and aspirations of the Tobiad family during a transitional period in regional history. Today, the structure remains partially collapsed, but its foundation and many walls still stand. The massive stones weather slowly under sun and wind. Vegetation grows in the cracks between blocks, and the dry valley around the palace keeps the site quiet and isolated. Walking through the rooms, the size of the stone blocks makes the human figure feel small. The craftsmanship is still visible, even where erosion has softened edges. The stone giants of Qasr al-Abd show how architecture can serve as both a statement and a mystery. They reflect a moment when local rulers blended Hellenistic influence with regional traditions to create a structure that was both monumental and personal. The unfinished elements leave a narrative open, a building that was ambitious but never fully realized, preserved enough to reveal its scale but silent about its final purpose. Qasr al-Abd remains a reminder that monumental architecture can exist far from the centers of power, shaped by individual ambition as much as by cultural tradition. Its massive stones, carved animals, and isolated setting give it a quiet gravity, a structure that stands not as a ruin of empire, but as the remains of a personal vision set in stone. The cave city of Vardzia, carved into the southern cliffs of Georgia's Irusheti Mountains. Vardzia appears at first glance like a patchwork of shadows and holes scattered across a high volcanic wall. From a distance, it resembles erosion patterns or natural caverns, but once you approach the terraces and openings, the scale becomes unmistakable. This is Vardzia, a medieval cave city containing more than 600 rooms, tunnels, storerooms, chapels, defensive passages, and residential spaces, all carved directly from the cliff face in the 12th and 13th centuries. It is one of the most ambitious rock-cut constructions in Eurasian history. Vardzia was created during the reign of King George III and expanded under his daughter, Queen Tamar, whose rule marked a high point in medieval Georgian culture. The builders chose a massive cliff wall of volcanic tuff, a material soft enough to carve yet strong enough to support multi-story architecture. The intention was not to create an underground village in isolation, but to integrate living, worship, defense, and storage into a single fortified landscape. The full scale of Vardzia becomes apparent once inside. Hidden behind the cliff's surface are interconnected corridors, stretching hundreds of meters horizontally. Rooms branch off these corridors in regular intervals: kitchens, wine cellars, sleeping chambers, granaries, and small chapels. Water channels cut into the rock carry fresh spring water through the complex, ensuring long-term survival even if the city were under siege. The most impressive feature is the Church of the Dormition, a large hall carved entirely within the cliff. Its walls were plastered and painted with frescoes that still survive in faded but recognizable detail. Scenes of biblical narratives, portraits of saints, and images of Queen Tamar herself appear across the interior. Carving such a space from stone and then decorating it with cathedral-quality artwork required both engineering precision and extensive artistic planning. Every part of Vardzia shows intentional design. Staircases connect upper and lower terraces. Passages link residential areas to storerooms. Defensive tunnels create escape routes and observation points. The layout suggests a settlement built with both practical needs and long-term resilience in mind. The city was not an improvised collection of caves, it was an engineered complex with internal planning comparable to a fortified town. The creation of Vardzia involved controlled removal of rock on a scale that is difficult to visualize. Builders carved from the cliff face inward, shaping rooms by cutting away large volumes of stone. The tough rock allowed for clean cuts, but the process required careful structural understanding to prevent collapse. Ceilings were carved in arch-like shapes to distribute weight. Supporting pillars were left in place when needed. Ventilation and drainage systems were carved simultaneously with living spaces. Why build a city inside a cliff? Several reasons converge. First, defense. The region faced threats from Mongol invasions and other military pressures. A concealed cliffside city provided natural protection. Second, monastic life. Parts of Vardzia functioned as a monastery, where monks lived and practiced religious disciplines in isolation. Third, safety and survival. The network of storerooms, water channels, and living quarters suggests that the complex was designed to sustain inhabitants for extended periods without outside contact. Over time, the city expanded beyond strictly monastic use. Evidence of pottery workshops, agricultural storage, and secular living spaces indicates that Vardzia became a mixed community. At its height, thousands of people may have lived in or around the complex, but Vardzia's appearance today is not what its builders intended. A massive earthquake in 1283 destroyed large sections of the city's outer wall. Many rooms and corridors that once lay deep inside the cliff were suddenly exposed, creating the open, honeycomb-like pattern visible on the cliff face today. This event drastically changed the site, leaving only a portion of the original city intact. Despite this, large internal sections remain well preserved. Certain corridors still retain their height and shape, with soot marks visible on kitchen ceilings. Wine presses carved into the rock still show channels where grape juice once flowed. The water supply system continues to function, delivering spring water through ancient channels cut into the stone. The combination of natural disaster and gradual erosion has made sections of the complex difficult to access, but ongoing preservation efforts maintain key rooms and passages. Archaeologists studying the site focus on tool marks, construction sequences, and architectural patterns that shed light on medieval Georgian engineering. Chisel marks on the walls reveal the tools used. Waste piles at the cliff base show where removed stone accumulated. These details help reconstruct the methods used to carve such a vast complex without written construction manuals. Standing inside one of the chambers, the space feels quiet and insulated. Light enters through small cliff openings, illuminating smooth carved walls that still hold the marks of medieval hands. From certain openings, the landscape below appears in full view, a broad valley once used for farming and trade, now peaceful and silent. The contrast between the open valley and the enclosed chambers underscores why this location worked so effectively as a defensible and self-sustaining community. The cave city of Vardzia represents more than architectural skill. It reflects a worldview where landscape, faith, and survival were tightly intertwined. Carving a city into a cliff was not solely a defensive choice. It was also a cultural and spiritual expression, a place where people lived close to the earth, sustained by its interior, spaces, and hidden pathways. The endurance of Vardzia is due to the stability of the rock and the deliberate engineering choices of its builders. Even after centuries of earthquakes, erosion, and abandonment, the city remains structurally coherent. Its rooms, tunnels, and stairways survive because they were carved with long-term durability in mind. Today, Vardzia stands as one of the most remarkable examples of rock-cut urban planning. It is a place where everyday life, worship, and protection merged into a single carved environment, a testament to the ability of medieval societies to shape landscapes in ways that still feel surprising. The massive stone stele of Carchemish. The ancient city of Carchemish lies on the Euphrates River, at the modern border between Turkey and Syria. When you look at the landscape today, the area appears mostly open and quiet, with fields stretching toward the river and low mounds marking archaeological zones. But beneath this calm environment was once one of the key political and religious centers of the Late Bronze Age and the Iron Age. The city served as a major capital linked first to the Hittite Empire and later to the smaller Neo-Hittite states that developed after the empire collapsed. Much of what survives from this long period of activity comes from a series of large carved stone stelae, upright slabs placed in specific architectural and ceremonial locations across the site. These stelae were carved from basalt and limestone, both hard stones chosen for durability. Some stand more than 2 meters tall, while others are slightly smaller but still large enough to dominate their surroundings. They were not placed randomly. Most were positioned along major processional routes, beside palace entrances, or within ceremonial courtyards. As people moved through the city, they would encounter a sequence of carved scenes showing rulers, deities, attendants, and symbolic animals. These images formed part of a larger visual program through which Carchemish expressed authority, religious beliefs, and cultural identity. The Neo-Hittite kings who ruled Carchemish inherited many artistic and religious traditions from the earlier Hittite Empire. They continued using the hieroglyphic Luwian script on their monuments, and they preserved the practice of carving deep relief scenes into stone. These scenes typically show the ruler participating in rituals, holding an offering bowl, pouring a libation, burning incense, or presenting symbols to a deity. Gods appear in specific poses, often standing on animals or holding objects associated with weather, fertility, or cosmic order. Attendants follow behind the ruler, carrying ritual tools or supporting items. One of the most distinctive features of the Carchemish stelae is the depth of their carving. Reliefs are cut deeply into the stone so that they remain visible even when erosion softens the edges. Tool marks still cover the surfaces, showing the sequence of carving. Broad chisel strokes were used to outline the main forms. Once these lines were established, carvers removed background stone to raise the figures above the surface. Finer tools were then used to add details. Because basalt is dense and difficult to shape, the carving process required highly trained craftsmen working with considerable repetition and accuracy. The best example of how these stelae were used can be seen in the architectural feature known as the Long Wall of Sculpture. This is a line of upright carved slabs, forming a ceremonial boundary. Anyone entering the palace district would walk beside this wall, passing image after image of gods, kings, and symbolic animals. The wall acted not only as a decoration, but as a narrative surface, communicating legitimacy, continuity, and divine approval. Its length and consistency show that the stelae were part of a coordinated design rather than isolated monuments. Understanding the scenes on the stelae depends on combining visual analysis with limited inscriptions. The hieroglyphic Luwian texts often identify the name of the king and may state that he performed a ritual or dedicated the monument, but the texts do not supply full explanations of each action. They rarely mention dates, specific festivals, or detailed ceremonies. Because of this, archaeologists interpret the images primarily by comparing repeated motifs across multiple monuments and looking at parallels from other Near Eastern cultures where similar rituals are documented. The imagery on the stelae fits into several broad categories. One category consists of offering scenes, where the king presents food, drink, or incense to a deity. Another category shows processions, often with musicians or attendants carrying items used in ceremonies. A third category includes animal symbolism, with lions, bulls, and hybrid creatures representing protective forces or divine attributes. The consistency of these categories indicates that the rituals depicted followed established patterns and were recognized by the community. The stelae also show evidence of chronological change. Earlier examples are less detailed and emphasize large, simple outlines. Later, stelae display more refined carving and greater attention to clothing, accessories, and facial features. This helps specialists place the monuments in approximate sequence, even when inscriptions are minimal. Changes in the depiction of the king's garments also reflect shifting political or cultural influences. Some rulers wear long patterned robes, similar to earlier Hittite tradition, while others appear in shorter garments more common in later Iron Age states. The political role of the stelae is equally important. Carchemish occupied a strategic position controlling trade and movement across the Euphrates. Because of this, its rulers needed to project stability and authority. Monumental carving helped accomplish this. When travelers, traders, or diplomats approached the city, they encountered the stone imagery before speaking to officials or entering administrative spaces. The stelae served as silent statements of power, communicating that the rulers had divine support and maintained continuity with earlier traditions. Many of the stelae were discovered during excavations conducted in the early 20th century. Some were removed and taken to museums for preservation. Others remained in place, but access to the site became restricted for many years due to political conditions in the region. Only recently have archaeologists returned to the site to continue mapping, documenting, and excavating the stelae still standing in their original locations. These new discoveries are important because they allow researchers to study the monuments within their architectural context rather than as isolated museum objects. Examining the stelae in situ reveals how they were incorporated into building layouts. Stelae beside gates marked boundaries between public and ceremonial areas. Those placed along walls helped define movement patterns. When positioned in courtyards, they likely served as focal points during gatherings or seasonal rituals. The architectural integration of the stelae shows that they were part of a broader urban design that linked space, movement, and ritual into a coordinated system. Tool marks on the surfaces offer valuable insight into carving techniques. Horizontal chisel strokes indicate areas where carvers smoothed surfaces. Diagonal marks show where outlines were defined. Cross-hatched areas suggest sections rough-cut before final shaping. These details help reconstruct techniques used in ancient workshops and highlight the skill required to carve dense basalt. One of the challenges with interpreting the stelae is the absence of a complete written archive from Carchemish. Although some inscriptions survive, they do not provide long narrative texts or detailed ritual descriptions. Most of what is known about the city's religious practices comes directly from the visual scenes themselves. This creates gaps in knowledge but also emphasizes the value of the stelae as primary evidence. They are among the few records that describe how the rulers interacted with the divine world and how the community structured its ceremonies. Standing at the site today, the stelae appear weathered but still clear enough to understand their imagery. Their dark basalt surfaces contrast with the lighter soil and exposed architectural stones around them. The figures are simple, not dramatic, and they follow a visual language that prioritizes clarity over artistic experimentation. The stelae serve as reminders of how ancient societies used stone, not only to record events, but to shape the experience of moving through a city. The massive stone stelae of Carchemish represent an essential part of the city's identity. They show how rulers expressed legitimacy, how rituals were performed, and how religious imagery shaped public space. Even though much of the city's written record has been lost, These stone monuments continue to provide a clear and grounded picture of its cultural world. Their presence today helps reconstruct the structure of belief, authority, and tradition in one of the most important cities of the ancient Near East. The Cyclopean Walls of Alatri. The town of Alatri, in central Italy, looks like a typical hilltop settlement when viewed today. Narrow streets wind through residential areas, and the modern town rises toward an elevated center. But underneath this ordinary appearance lies a major example of ancient engineering. Alatri's upper district is surrounded by a set of massive stone walls known as the Cyclopean Walls, built from large polygonal blocks that fit together with unusual precision. These walls have survived for more than 2,000 years, raising ongoing questions about construction methods, planning, and the society responsible for building them. The walls enclose the highest part of the hill, forming what archaeologists refer to as the Acropolis. This Acropolis stands at the core of the ancient settlement and once served both defensive and ceremonial purposes. The masonry technique used involves enormous limestone blocks, some weighing several tons. Each block has been shaped with multiple angles so that it matches the surrounding stones almost perfectly. No mortar holds them together. The stability comes entirely from the weight of the stones and the accuracy of the fits. Even today, the joints between many blocks are tight enough that the surface looks almost seamless. The exact date of the walls has been debated for more than a century. Early researchers attributed them to mythical builders or to distant cultures, such as the Mycenaeans. Later studies placed them within the Italic Iron Age, likely between the 6th and 4th centuries BCE. The region was occupied by Italic peoples, such as the Hernici, and the construction of large hilltop fortifications fits with the broader defensive strategies of pre-Roman central Italy. Although the precise cultural affiliation is not fully confirmed, most scholars agree that these walls were built by local Italic populations before Roman dominance. The construction method used at Alatri is classified as polygonal masonry, specifically the more advanced Type 2 and Type 3 forms. In Type 2, blocks are shaped into irregular polygons with multiple sides. In Type 3, the shaping is even more precise, requiring more complex angles and more careful fitting. Alatri features some of the most advanced examples of Type 3 masonry in the region. The blocks appear irregular at first glance, but the closer one examines them, the more deliberate the angles and surfaces become. Each stone interlocks with its neighbors, forming a stable structure that has resisted earthquakes and erosion over many centuries. Building a wall like this required planning on multiple levels. Builders needed to determine the size and shape of each block, choose the correct area for each stone, and coordinate the placement so that the entire wall maintained structural integrity. Quarries near the site contain evidence of stone extraction consistent with limestone bedrock splitting. Blocks were removed using simple tools such as hammers, chisels, and wooden wedges. After rough extraction, workers shaped the stones by repeatedly striking the surfaces to create flat faces and angled edges. The stones were then transported to the construction site, likely using sledges, rollers, or teams of workers. Fitting the stones into place was a slow process. Workers would set a block into position, identify areas where it did not match the adjoining stones, remove it, reshape it, and try again. Repeated adjustments allowed the builders to achieve the tight fits that characterize the walls. This method does not require advanced tools, but it does require patience, organization, and experience. The precision visible today is the result of many incremental corrections made during construction. One of the most striking features of the Alatri Acropolis is the Porta Maggiore, the largest surviving entrance. This gateway is framed by massive polygonal blocks and topped by a single large lintel stone. The lintel spans the width of the opening and demonstrates confidence in the stability of the surrounding masonry. Unlike some other ancient sites that use corbelled arches, Alatri relies on this single heavy block. The fact that it remains in place after so many centuries shows that the builders understood the balancing forces involved. Inside the Acropolis, additional structures also use polygonal masonry. Retaining walls, terraces, and platforms appear in multiple areas. Later, historical periods built churches and other buildings on top of the ancient foundations, but the original polygonal blocks are still visible in many walls. This layering illustrates how the site remained important across long periods of history, adapting to changing cultural needs while preserving its oldest architectural core. The function of the walls goes beyond purely defensive concerns. Their scale, precision, and visibility suggest symbolic importance. In many ancient communities, large-scale construction projects served as expressions of collective identity and cooperation. They demonstrated the ability of a community to organize labor, control territory, and create enduring structures. The Alatri walls likely played a similar role, reinforcing the community's cohesion and standing. Some researchers have proposed that the Acropolis integrates certain alignments or geometric principles, noting features such as straight wall segments meeting at deliberate angles. While interpretations vary, there is agreement that the layout is intentional and structured. The builders clearly understood how to maintain straight lines over long distances, even on uneven terrain. This required surveying skills, observational knowledge, and an ability to plan construction across large areas. The durability of the walls also indicates an understanding of structural mechanics. Polygonal masonry distributes pressure across multiple angled joints, which helps the wall resist earthquakes and natural shifts in the ground. Instead of relying on a single vertical joint, the interconnected shapes create stability through weight distribution. This is one of the reasons why polygonal walls have survived in multiple ancient sites across Italy. From an archaeological standpoint, the walls of Alatri provide direct insight into ancient building practices. Tool marks show how blocks were shaped. Quarry remains reveal where stone came from and how it was extracted. The orientation and arrangement of the walls show how the builders handled gradients and slopes. Each element contributes to a better understanding of the technical knowledge available to Italic communities before the rise of Roman engineering. Although the walls demonstrate a high degree of craftsmanship, they do not require speculation about advanced or lost technologies. The precision can be explained through a combination of knowledge, practice, and repeated corrections. High-quality polygonal masonry is labor-intensive, rather than technologically advanced. It reflects time, effort, and organization, rather than machinery. The walls also shed light on relationships between different Italic settlements. Similar construction styles appear in several towns across the region, indicating that knowledge of polygonal masonry spread through cultural interaction. Whether through shared traditions, movement of craftsmen, or regional alliances, the technique became a recognizable architectural signature in central Italy. Today, one can walk along parts of the Acropolis and observe the details of the masonry. The blocks remain solid, with minimal collapse. Vegetation grows in some crevices, but does little to compromise the structure. The stone's surfaces show weathering, yet the overall geometry remains clear. Seeing the walls in person highlights the builder's commitment to durability. Every block was positioned to withstand time and environmental pressure. The Cyclopean walls of Alatri represent more than an ancient fortification. They reflect a worldview in which architecture was a long-term statement. The strength of the structure, the care taken in shaping the stones, and the organization required to complete the project all point to a community that valued permanence. The remains allow historians and archaeologists to reconstruct the social and technical capacities of the people who built them. Although many details about the builders remain unknown, the walls themselves provide reliable evidence of their abilities. They show that early Italic societies could manage complex projects without centralized imperial power or advanced mechanical tools. Through the stones, we see a community that used its environment effectively and that left behind a structure capable of surviving long after its culture transitioned into the Roman world. The Cyclopean walls of Alatri remain one of the clearest examples of polygonal masonry in the Mediterranean. Their presence continues to shape the town, influence research, and raise questions about ancient construction. Even without written explanations, the stones communicate the intentions of their builders: stability, identity, and endurance. The stone mega face of Guizhou, China. In the mountains of Guizhou province in southwestern China, a particular cliff face has attracted attention for decades. At first glance, it appears to be part of the region's typical karst landscape, shaped by erosion, rainfall, and long-term geological processes. But when viewed from a certain angle and distance, the rock surface seems to resemble a human face. The formation includes features that appear similar to a forehead, nose, cheek, mouth, and chin. This has led to long-standing debates about whether the mega face, as it is often called, is a natural formation or a result of human modification at some point in the past. Guizhou is known for dramatic cliffs, caves, and limestone formations. The area's karst geology produces deep valleys, sharp ridges, and irregular rock shapes. Over time, weathering processes create surfaces that can resemble patterns familiar to the human brain. This makes the region a place where natural rock shapes often look like animals, objects, or human features when seen from specific angles. Because of this, some researchers believe the megaface is an example of natural erosion being interpreted symbolically. The cliff that contains the megaface is large, and the supposed features cover many meters of vertical rock. The nose section alone spans several meters, and the chin area extends across a broad base of the formation. Such scale would require significant effort if carved intentionally. There are no clear tool marks visible on the surface, no evidence of chiseling, and no shaping patterns typically associated with ancient rock carving. The features appear to blend smoothly into the surrounding geological layers, suggesting natural weathering. However, the situation is more complicated than it appears. Some local traditions claim that the formation has been known for centuries and was believed to represent a guardian figure or symbolic spirit associated with the region. These oral traditions do not specify human carving, but they indicate long-term recognition of the face-like appearance. In some cases, early travelers and local residents recorded impressions of the cliff shape in written documents, noting its resemblance to a human head. These descriptions show that the interpretation is not a modern invention. Another factor that draws attention is the symmetry. Although not perfectly symmetrical, the formation includes shapes that align more closely with human facial proportions than many naturally weathered cliffs. For example, the nose protrusion is centrally located, and the alignment of the mouth and chin matches typical vertical spacing. This raises the question of whether natural erosion coincidentally created these shapes, or whether ancient people enhanced them slightly to make the resemblance clearer. In archaeology, natural formations with potential human modification require careful analysis. Researchers look for consistent tool marks, removal scars, or chisel lines. None of these indicators are present at the megaface. Detailed surveys show that the cliff surface is fractured in ways typical of long-term karst weathering. The cracks follow natural planes of weakness in the rock rather than planned sculptural outlines. The smoother areas result from rainwater flow, while the protruding areas represent sections more resistant to erosion. The surrounding area contains no signs of ancient quarrying or construction. There are no platforms, steps, or carved surfaces that typically accompany large-scale rock carvings in many cultures. China has numerous examples of deliberate rock-carved sculptures, such as the stone Buddhas of Sichuan, the Longmen grottos, and the Dazu rock carvings. These examples show clear tool marks and consistent sculptural detailing. The megaface lacks these features, making it unlikely that it belongs to the same tradition. Despite this, the formation remains significant. Local interpretations shape how the community relates to the landscape. In some villages nearby, the cliff is considered a natural guardian or symbolic watcher. Certain cultural practices involve acknowledging or referencing the formation, especially during festivals or community gatherings. These traditions highlight how natural features can take on cultural meaning, even without direct modification. From a geological perspective, the cliff formed over millions of years as tectonic forces uplifted the region and erosion carved away softer material. The face-like appearance may result from differential erosion, where harder rock remains in relief, while softer rock erodes more quickly. Water flow over the cliff may have shaped the smoother contours, while freeze-thaw cycles widened cracks and created deeper shadows around certain areas. Researchers examining the megaface compare it with similar formations around the world. Natural rock shapes, resembling human faces, appear in Canada, the United States, Turkey, and Madagascar. Some of these formations developed entirely through natural weathering, while others show small adjustments made by ancient people. The megaface fits into this global pattern, a rock shape that triggers human recognition patterns. The brain is wired to identify faces quickly, even when the resemblance is minimal. This cognitive tendency often leads communities to assign meaning where none was intentionally created. The large scale of the formation complicates interpretation. If ancient people had carved even part of it, the effort would have required significant labor and planning. Large-scale rock carving in ancient China is typically associated with religious or imperial projects, supported by state-level organization. However, the megaface is located in a remote mountain region, far from known ancient capitals, major trade centers, or imperial monuments. There is no evidence of a large ancient settlement nearby that could support a major sculptural project. Survey teams examining the area have looked for any remains of scaffolding holes, tool depots, or abandoned stone fragments. None have been identified. Soil layers near the cliff do not contain debris associated with stoneworking. This absence supports the conclusion that the formation is natural, even if its resemblance to a human face is striking. The megaface also offers insight into how ancient societies interpreted their natural environment. Even without carving, cliffs and rock formations often became symbolic markers or sacred places. In many parts of the world, natural rock shapes were integrated into mythological stories, cultural practices, or territorial identity. The megaface may have served similar functions. Its scale and visibility would make it a natural landmark in the region. Modern interest in the formation has increased due to photography, tourism, and online discussion. Images circulated widely show the face from the angle where the resemblance is strongest. From other angles, the shape becomes less recognizable, reinforcing the idea that the resemblance depends heavily on perspective. This is another strong indicator of natural formation, because intentionally carved faces usually maintain clarity from multiple viewpoints. Even though the megaface is almost certainly a natural formation, it remains an archaeological subject because of the cultural interpretations surrounding it. Archaeology often examines the interaction between people and landscape. In this case, the formation shows how human perception shapes the meaning of natural structures. The community's relationship with the rock face, including traditions and symbolic associations, forms part of its cultural heritage. Technically, the formation consists of layered limestone, shaped by long-term water flow. Rainwater dissolves limestone over time, widening cracks and creating rounded surfaces. Wind erosion contributes to smoothing exposed areas. Over centuries, these processes interact in complex ways, producing irregular patterns that can resemble familiar shapes. The large nose section of the megaface likely results from a vertical fracture line that eroded more slowly than adjacent surfaces. The mouth area corresponds to a horizontal break where water runoff consistently cut into the rock. The megaface serves as a case study in how natural geology and human interpretation intersect. It demonstrates that not all impressive stone features require human modification to carry cultural meaning. Sometimes natural formations become landmarks because they resemble recognizable shapes. Communities then assign stories and significance to them, integrating them into cultural identity without altering the landscape. Today, researchers continue to document the formation, capturing high-resolution scans and comparing them with local geological samples. These studies help clarify erosion patterns and confirm the natural origin of the structure. At the same time, local communities maintain traditional interpretations, demonstrating how cultural meaning can persist alongside scientific understanding. The stone megaface of Guizhou highlights the balance between nature and perception. It stands as a reminder that landscapes can influence human imagination, and that even without deliberate carving, a cliff can become a symbol. The formation remains a distinctive feature in the region, not because of its origin, but because of the way people continue to interpret it. The basalt lion pillars of Qasr Shebib, Jordan. Qasr Shebib stands on a rise in central Jordan, not far from the routes that once connected the highlands to the desert. Today, the site appears as a combination of ruins, scattered stones, and partially preserved walls made from dark basalt blocks. The remains belong to a fortress complex built during late antiquity and modified across several later periods. One of the most distinctive features of the site is a group of basalt pillars and towers adorned with lion carvings. These carvings represent one of the strongest surviving symbols of the fortified landscape and reflect a tradition in which animal imagery played an important role in marking authority, protection, and identity. Basalt is common in this region of Jordan, especially in areas close to the volcanic fields stretching toward the northeast. Builders at Qasr Shabib use this material extensively. The stone is dense, strong, and able to withstand weathering, making it suitable for fortifications. The dark color also gives the site a recognizable appearance. Walls, towers, and platforms were constructed using large rectangular blocks laid in horizontal courses. The layout shows that the builders had access to organized labor and understood how to create stable defensive structures on uneven terrain. The lion carvings appear on several upright pillars and tower bases within the complex. Some carvings are positioned low on the stone surface, while others are integrated into the upper parts of the blocks. In each case, The lions are represented in a raised outline carved directly into the basalt. The style varies across examples, but most lions are shown in a side profile, with the head and body simplified into clear, readable shapes. The carvings were made by cutting away surrounding stone, leaving the lion image slightly elevated. Although erosion has softened some details, the overall form remains visible. Interpreting the purpose of these lion carvings involves understanding the broader tradition of animal symbolism in the region. Throughout the ancient Near East, lions were associated with protection, strength, and authority. In many cultures, they marked important thresholds, guarded entrances, or symbolized power held by local rulers or military leaders. At Qasr Shabib, the presence of lions on pillars near walls or gateways suggests that they served a protective function. Their placement likely communicated that the site was defended and controlled by a group capable of authority. The fortress itself went through different phases of occupation, and the lion pillars appear to belong to an early period of use. Later additions and repairs do not always include carved decoration, suggesting that the original builders placed more emphasis on symbolic elements than those who occupied the site later. Some researchers associate the early phase of Qasr Shabib with the Lakhmids or other regional dynasties that maintained control near the edges of Roman and Byzantine territories. Others propose local tribal groups who built fortified residences using similar techniques. Regardless of the specific affiliation, the fortress demonstrates organized construction. The walls align in rectangular patterns, and the towers stand at corners or along strategic points, overlooking the surrounding landscape. The basalt blocks used for construction were likely quarried nearby, shaped with hammerstones and chisels, and transported using carts or teams of workers. Tool marks on the pillars indicate repeated chisel strokes used to form the lions and outline their features. The carving style is consistent with other basalt sculptures in the region, where images are simplified but still recognizable. The lion pillars also help identify where entrances or significant internal spaces were located. Pillars with carvings often stand near points of transition within the complex. By marking these locations with symbolic animals, the builders created a visual cue for movement and hierarchy. For example, a lion pillar might mark the threshold between an outer courtyard and an inner, more restricted zone. This would allow visitors to recognize that they were entering a space requiring authority or permission. Although the lion carvings are relatively small compared to full-size sculptures found in major urban centers, their presence at a rural fortress highlights the diffusion of cultural motifs. Lion imagery spread across the Near East through trade, political contact, and artistic exchange. Even communities far from major cities adopted the symbol, integrating it into their architecture. Qasr Shabib shows how these ideas reached local building traditions and were adapted into the practical environment of a fortress. The basalt pillars are important for understanding the craftsmanship of the builders. Basalt is difficult to carve because of its hardness. Creating even simple relief images requires repeated chisel strikes, steady hands, and knowledge of how the stone responds. The lions at Qasr Shabib are not highly detailed, but they are executed with confidence. The lines forming the body, legs, and head are clear. Though time has eroded much of the finer detail, the main shapes still carry enough information to identify the animal easily. The context around the carvings provides additional information. Some pillars stand independently, suggesting that they once supported roofs or framed doorways. Others are integrated into wall sections, providing structural support while also carrying the carved symbol. In both cases, the combination of function and symbolism shows how architecture and imagery overlapped in ancient fortresses. The pillars were not purely decorative, they were part of the building's stability. Adding carved lions to them allowed the builders to embed meaning directly into structural elements. Archaeological work at Qasr Shabib has documented the layout of the fortress and identified phases of occupation. Excavations reveal domestic spaces, storage areas, and open courtyards. The walls show signs of repairs and modifications, indicating long-term use. However, not all parts of the complex have been fully excavated, leaving open questions about how large the original structure was and how it functioned within the region's political landscape. The lack of written records from the site means that interpretation relies heavily on architectural evidence. The lion pillars, therefore, play a central role. Their presence confirms a symbolic system tied to protection and authority. Their placement suggests deliberate design, Their carving technique indicates skilled craftsmen familiar with basalt. Together, these features provide a framework for understanding the fortress and its cultural setting. The broader region around Qasr Shabib contains similar basalt constructions. Towers, walls, and carved stones appear in other sites around the Jordanian highlands and desert edge. This suggests a network of fortified places built by communities who used basalt both for practicality and for symbolic expression. The lion carvings at Qasr Shabib may reflect shared traditions or local adaptations of widely recognized symbols. Standing at the site today, the pillars appear dark and weathered, but their carved outlines remain visible in the sunlight. The walls around them have partially collapsed, leaving gaps where stones have fallen or been repurposed, yet the basic structure is still recognizable. The fortress sits in a position where it could monitor movement across the landscape. The basalt surfaces show the marks of age, but also the durability that allowed them to survive for so long. The site is quiet. There is no signage explaining the lions, and most of the ruins lie exposed without recent restoration. This allows the stonework to speak for itself. The pillars stand as reminders of a time when fortresses marked the boundaries of tribal or local authority. The lion carvings show how people integrated symbolic meaning into everyday structures, blending security needs with cultural identity. From a historical perspective, Qasr Shabib reflects the transitional periods between larger empires. The region was influenced by Roman, Byzantine, Arab, and local political powers across different centuries. The fortress represents localized control rather than imperial architecture. Its lion carvings link it to wider traditions, while retaining a uniquely regional style. The basalt lion pillars of Qasr Shabib demonstrate how ancient builders combined structural engineering with symbolic expression. They show that even in remote areas, communities invested effort into carving images that conveyed meaning and protection. The survival of these pillars provides a direct connection to the people who shaped them and to the landscape they inhabited. Although many aspects of the fortress remain uncertain, the lion carvings stand as clear evidence of cultural continuity and architectural skill. They remain part of the physical memory of the site, preserving a record of how ancient communities used stone to define identity, authority, and presence in a landscape shaped by both geology and human activity. The Forgotten Stone Pyramids of Visoko, Bosnia. The town of Visoko, located in central Bosnia, sits in a valley surrounded by hills that rise in sharp, triangular shapes. One of these hills, known as Visočica, attracted worldwide attention in the early 2000s when claims circulated that it might be a large, human-made stone pyramid covered by soil and vegetation. The suggestion drew researchers, media teams, and visitors. It also brought debate between those who consider the hill a natural formation and those who believe it contains ancient terraces or man-made structural elements beneath the surface. The site remains controversial, but it has also become a case study in how geology, archaeology, and public interpretation intersect. Visoko is an area with long-term occupation. Medieval fortifications sit on top of Visočica Hill, and earlier layers contain remains from Roman and prehistoric periods. The region has complex geological formations, including layers of sandstone, conglomerate, and claystone. These materials erode in ways that naturally form angular slopes and flat surfaces. Because of this, some scientists consider the triangular shape of the hill a natural result of geological processes rather than evidence of intentional construction. Supporters of the pyramid theory point to several features. One is the presence of stone slabs that appear arranged in horizontal layers. These slabs resemble terrace steps when viewed in photographs. Another point of interest is a series of underground tunnels and chambers found in the broader Visoko Valley. Some claim these tunnels connect the pyramids and represent ancient engineering. The argument is that human intervention shaped the hills into pyramidal forms and constructed networks beneath them. Archaeologists examining the site note that the stone slabs are typical of natural bedding planes found in sedimentary rock formations. Over time, weathering and erosion break these layers into rectangular or polygonal blocks that may resemble structured building stones. The apparent terraces, according to geological studies, can form when resistant layers erode more slowly than softer ones, creating stepped patterns that resemble terraces but result from natural forces. Excavations in the early 2000s uncovered several flat stone surfaces on the slopes. These surfaces led some to propose that the slabs were purposely laid in layers. However, laboratory analysis of the stone material indicates that they are natural geological layers of sandstone and breccia. The surfaces appear intentionally shaped because natural erosion exposes the edges of the beds in straight or gently curved lines. The stones break along these natural fractures, creating shapes that can be mistaken for human-cut blocks. Another feature of the valley is the network of tunnels, known as the Ravni tunnels. These passageways extend through soft rock and debris layers. Supporters of the pyramid theory argue that the tunnels represent an ancient underground system built for ventilation, movement, or ritual purposes. Critics point out that the tunnels contain collapsed sections, sediment fill, and irregular walls typical of abandoned mine shafts or natural voids modified in later periods. There is no confirmed evidence of ancient tool marks or architectural planning within the tunnels. Despite the geological explanations, the site continues to attract interest because it combines natural shapes that resemble cultural structures with limited archaeological visibility. Hills with strong geometric outlines naturally invite interpretation. Human perception tends to associate triangular mountains with pyramids, especially when flat stone surfaces or terraces appear beneath the soil. In Visoko's case, the hills rise in angles that resemble pyramid slopes, and erosion patterns reveal surfaces that reinforce the visual impression. The region's history adds another layer to the discussion. Bosnia has experienced multiple cultural phases: prehistoric settlements, Roman presence, medieval kingdoms, and Ottoman influence. While none of these cultures are known to have built stone pyramids, they did use hilltops for fortification and ceremonial purposes. The medieval fortress on top of Visočica Hill shows that the location was significant long before modern interpretations. However, this established history makes it unlikely that much older, pyramid-building cultures existed in the region without leaving additional evidence. Archaeological research depends heavily on context. A single feature, such as a flat stone surface, cannot be interpreted without examining surrounding layers and associated artifacts. Excavations at Visoko have not yielded pottery, tools, or cultural material typical of large-scale ancient construction. Without these supporting items, claims of a previously unknown pyramid-building civilization lack material foundation. Nevertheless, the site remains important because it reveals how people interact with landscapes. Even if the hills are natural, the terraces and flat areas help researchers understand erosion patterns and sediment behavior in the region. The tunnels, regardless of their origin, show how later communities may have used or repurposed existing geological features. In archaeology, natural sites with cultural interpretation are valuable because they reflect how societies attach meaning to their surroundings. From a geological standpoint, the pyramid hills can be explained by the structure of the sedimentary layers beneath them. The region contains tilted bedrock that erodes along planes of weakness. This creates triangular slopes when material collapses or washes away. The bedding planes form flat surfaces that resemble stone blocks. These processes occur slowly over thousands of years and can create formations that look deliberate, but are not the result of human activity. The debates surrounding the Visoko Hills show the difference between scientific investigation and public interpretation. Early promotional material emphasized dramatic possibilities without confirming the evidence. Media coverage amplified these claims. Meanwhile, geological teams and archaeological institutions approached the site using systematic methods. The contrast between these approaches helped shape the ongoing discussion. Even though the evidence supports a natural origin for the hills, the Visoko Valley continues to serve as a cultural and tourist destination. The interest itself has created a new layer of significance. Visitors explore the tunnels, walk the slopes, and form their own interpretations. This shows how a modern cultural narrative can influence the meaning of a landscape, even when scientific analysis points in another direction. The site demonstrates how easily natural formations can be interpreted as ancient structures when they resemble familiar shapes. This phenomenon occurs worldwide. In several regions, naturally formed mountains have been mistaken for pyramids or temples. In each case, investigation requires careful geological and archaeological study to separate human construction from natural processes. The Visoko Hills fit into this global pattern. The terrace-like areas around the hills still provide information useful to researchers. They show how erosion exposes flat rock layers. They help map the geological history of the valley. They also reveal how soil movement and weathering affect steep slopes. Researchers studying these surfaces can build models of landscape development, which contribute to broader understanding of regional geology. Regardless of whether the structures are man-made or natural, the hills influence how communities relate to their environment. The shape of the landforms affects settlement patterns, defensive strategy, agricultural decisions, and cultural imagination. Even in ancient times, people living in the valley would have recognized the distinct shapes of the hills and integrated them into their understanding of the landscape. From an archaeological perspective, the most important conclusion is that the hills are part of the natural geology of central Bosnia. However, the attention given to them has created an opportunity to study how natural formations can be interpreted as cultural artifacts when their shape aligns with recognizable patterns. It also emphasizes the importance of evidence-based research in examining claims about ancient construction. Today, the hills remain in their natural state, covered with vegetation and marked by erosion. Stone layers continue to appear where soil has washed away. The tunnels remain a point of interest, and ongoing documentation helps clarify their structure. The valley surrounding the hills contains known archaeological sites, including medieval complexes and prehistoric settlements. These provide the real cultural context for understanding the region's present-natical past. The forgotten stone pyramids of Visoko stand as a reminder that landscapes can inspire interpretation even without direct human modification. The hills are visually striking and geologically interesting. While they are almost certainly natural formations, they continue to shape cultural narratives and attract attention. Their significance lies not in ancient construction, but in the interaction between geology, community interpretation, and the desire to find meaning in the shapes of the land. The megalithic tomb of Polnabrone, Ireland. Polnabrone sits on a limestone plateau in the Burren region of Western Ireland, a landscape defined by cracked stone surfaces, shallow soil, and scattered vegetation. In the middle of this terrain stands one of the most recognizable megalithic monuments in Ireland, the Polnabrone Portal Tomb, a structure built more than 5,000 years ago. It consists of upright limestone slabs supporting a large horizontal capstone, creating a simple but enduring monument. Although weathered and eroded, the tomb has remained standing for millennia, offering insight into early communities and their relationship with landscape, ritual, and memory. The tomb belongs to a group known as portal dolmens, a type of Neolithic burial structure found across Ireland and parts of Britain. These monuments share a similar form. 2 or more upright stones mark the entrance or portal, while other uprights create a chamber covered by a single large capstone. Polnabrone is notable because of its location on exposed limestone bedrock and its longevity. The capstone weighs several tons, and its balance on the uprights demonstrates careful planning and an understanding of stability. Archaeological excavation around the tomb in the late 20th century revealed important information about its use. Researchers found the remains of more than 20 individuals buried within or near the chamber. These remains included adults, teenagers, and children. The bones showed signs of wear, disease, and injuries consistent with life in early farming communities. The burials were not placed at one time. Instead, the tomb appears to have been used over several centuries as a collective burial site. This pattern is common in Neolithic Ireland, where tombs served as communal markers and gathering points for rituals. The construction of the tomb required organized effort. While the stones came from the local limestone bedrock, lifting and positioning them still demanded coordinated labor. Workers likely used wooden levers, ropes, and earthen ramps to raise the uprights. Once the chamber was prepared, the capstone was moved into place using similar methods. Although the technology was simple, the process was time-consuming and required planning. The builders knew how to create a stable structure that could resist the weather conditions of the Burren. The entrance of the tomb faces a specific direction, a feature found in many megalithic structures. While exact alignment varies among portal tombs, the orientation often reflects a relationship with the broader landscape. At Polnabrone, the tomb faces toward open areas of the Burren, possibly linking it to pathways, seasonal events, or community territories. The monument's placement on elevated, open ground makes it visible from a distance, suggesting that its location held symbolic or social significance. Excavation also uncovered fragments of pottery, stone tools, and animal bones near the tomb. These items likely represent ritual deposits connected to the burials. The pottery fragments come from Neolithic vessels, indicating that people left offerings or participated in ceremonies at the site. The animal bones include remains from cattle and sheep, which may point to feasting or ritual sacrifice. These materials provide evidence that the tomb served not only as a burial place, but also as a focal point for gatherings and community activities. The monument's design demonstrates practical knowledge of stone behavior. The uprights lean inward slightly, creating stability by directing the weight of the capstone down toward the center of the structure. The chamber is small, consistent with other portal tombs. These structures were not intended for people to enter regularly. Instead, burials were placed by temporarily moving stones, or by placing remains through gaps between the uprights. Over time, the soil and small stones surrounding the tomb eroded away, leaving the structure more exposed than it originally appeared. The surrounding landscape of the Burren also contributes to the monument's significance. The region's limestone pavement contains cracks and fissures known as grikes, separated by flat surfaces called clints. This environment may have influenced how early communities chose burial locations. The hard ground preserved the monument's base, preventing it from sinking. The open terrain provided visibility, allowing the tomb to mark territory or serve as a meeting point. People in the Neolithic period lived in small farming communities. They cleared land, grew crops, and raised animals. Burials in communal tombs reflect shared identity and long-term connection to the land. Polnabrone's long use period shows that multiple generations returned to the same site to inter their dead. This suggests a stable community with enduring traditions rather than short-term or migratory groups. Although the tomb appears simple, its long survival indicates careful engineering. The capstone is supported by upright slabs that were placed with precision. Erosion has softened the edges of the stones, but the general shape and structure remain intact. The tomb would originally have been surrounded by a low cairn of stones, which helped stabilize the uprights. Over centuries, the cairn eroded or was removed by natural processes and human activity, leaving only the core structure. Modern archaeological methods help reconstruct the original sequence of events. Soil layers collected around the tomb show changes in environmental conditions over thousands of years. Pollen samples help determine the types of plants present when the tomb was in use. These studies reveal that the Burren region was more heavily forested during the Neolithic period. Over time, human activity and climate change contributed to the open landscape seen today. The tomb also shows evidence of social practices surrounding death. The remains found inside did not represent primary burials. The bones were placed after initial decomposition, meaning the bodies were likely left elsewhere to decompose before their bones were collected for deposition. This practice indicates ritual processes involving multiple stages. It also shows that the tomb was used as a place for curated remains rather than immediate interment. Such practices reflect beliefs about ancestral connection and the ongoing role of the dead in the community. Polnabrone's significance continued into later periods. Although no longer used as a burial site after the Neolithic, its presence remained part of the landscape. Medieval populations recognized the tomb as an ancient monument, though they may not have known its original purpose. In more recent centuries, the tomb became a landmark visited by travelers and researchers. Its preservation has allowed archaeologists to study long-term continuity in monumental building traditions in Ireland. Today, the site is protected, and access is controlled to prevent erosion. The limestone around the tomb is fragile, and foot traffic can damage the surface. Conservation efforts focus on maintaining the integrity of the stones and monitoring soil movement. These steps ensure that the monument remains intact for future study. The Polnabrone portal tomb provides direct insight into the early farming communities of Ireland. It shows how people organized communal labor to build long-lasting structures. It reveals their approach to burial and ritual, and it demonstrates how a monument can remain part of the landscape for thousands of years, carrying meaning across changing cultural contexts. While the structure itself is simple, its endurance and the archaeological evidence surrounding it give a detailed picture of life and belief in the Neolithic period. The tomb stands on open limestone ground, shaped by weather and time, yet still expresses the intentions of the people who built it. It remains a quiet, stable element in a landscape that has transformed around it, forming a link between the present and a distant past. The face towers of Ko Kur, Cambodia. Ko Kur lies deep in the forests of northern Cambodia, away from major towns, and far from the better-known temples around Angkor. For many centuries, the area remained lightly explored because the dense vegetation concealed most of the structures. When surveys began documenting the site in detail, a large royal complex became visible, showing that Kokare once served as the capital of the Khmer Empire for a brief period in the 10th century CE. The architecture recovered from this short but active phase includes more than 100 temples, shrines, and reservoirs. Among them, the most distinctive features are the face towers, structures with large sandstone faces carved into their upper levels. The face towers at Kokare appear earlier than the more famous face towers of the Bayon Temple at Angkor Thom. They show that the architectural idea of integrating large human faces into temple structures did not begin in the late 12th or early 13th century, as previously assumed, but had earlier expressions at Kokare during the reign of King Jayavarman IV. These early examples are smaller and fewer in number, but they represent the starting point for a design that later became one of the best-known symbols of Khmer architecture. The site extends across a wide area. It includes linear causeways, step temples, shrines built on laterite foundations, and large water reservoirs. The forest environment plays a role in how the ruins appear today. In many parts of the site, the forest canopy stretches over the structures, and roots weave between blocks. When sunlight passes through the vegetation, parts of the carved faces become visible at higher points of the towers. This gives the site a distinctive character, where architecture and forest growth overlap. The face towers are built mainly from sandstone blocks supported by laterite cores. Sandstone was quarried in large quantities for construction projects during the period. Blocks were transported using prepared paths, and each block required shaping before placement. Tool marks visible on unfinished surfaces show consistent use of iron chisels. Once the towers were structurally complete, sculptors carved the faces directly into the upper blocks. The carvings were executed in shallow relief, allowing the facial features to be seen clearly, even when erosion softened some lines over time. Each face typically looks outward from the tower. Many towers include faces oriented toward the four cardinal directions. The expressions are calm and symmetrical, with slightly curved lips, broad noses, and elongated eyes, features commonly associated with Khmer sacred iconography. Although these carvings have eroded, the overall compositional layout remains identifiable. The uniformity of the facial style suggests that a coordinated workshop produced the carvings rather than multiple unconnected teams. The orientation of the faces reflects the Khmer use of cosmological alignment in architecture. Temple complexes in the region commonly follow cardinal layouts, linking architecture with religious concepts. Directional faces may have served as symbolic guardians overseeing the temple grounds. This interpretation fits with the broader architectural practice of placing protective figures at entrances, gateways, or elevated positions. At Kokare, the face towers appear in prominent positions near pathways, courtyards, and transition points between outer and inner temple spaces. Kokare's historical context helps explain the towers. The site became the capital when King Jayavarman IV moved the royal center away from Angkor. During his reign, construction was carried out at an unusually fast pace. Large temples, reservoirs, and monumental structures were built within a short time frame. The architecturally ambitious stepped pyramid of Prasat Thom is the most prominent feature, but the face towers around the site belong to the same phase of rapid development. The faces carved into the towers may represent multiple layers of meaning. In later periods, face towers at Angkor Thom are often interpreted as representing the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, or the king himself depicted in divine form. At Kokare, however, the context differs. Buddhism had not yet become dominant at the state level. Hindu traditions were still central. Because of this, the face towers may represent a guardian deity or a symbolic expression of kingship rather than a Buddhist figure. The carving style supports this interpretation because it aligns more closely with earlier Khmer artistic traditions. Archaeological study of the towers requires examining both the surrounding structures and the physical evidence on the stone. Tool marks show patterns of repeated chiseling. Blocks fit tightly together, indicating planning and coordination. The sandstone used at the site has a grain that responds predictably to carving, allowing sculptors to form facial contours. Although erosion has affected some surfaces, the original shapes remain identifiable enough for researchers to study their design. The towers also reflect the organization of space within the ancient capital. Kokare was not a compact temple complex like Angkor Wat. Instead, structures were distributed across a large area connected by roads and causeways. face towers served as reference points within this landscape. Their placement at temple entrances or along route intersections helped visitors orient themselves as they moved through the site. The towers therefore functioned both symbolically and practically. The forest environment, while creating challenges for conservation, also protected many structures from collapse. Roots can displace stones, but the shade provided by the canopy slows weathering. The face towers that remain standing today show both the effects of preservation and damage. Some towers retain their full carved faces, others show only fragments, where blocks have fallen or carvings have been eroded almost completely. Conservation teams document the carvings to preserve information before further deterioration occurs. Understanding the construction process helps explain the durability of the towers. Khmer builders designed structures using a combination of laterite and sandstone. The laterite core provides strength, while the sandstone blocks form the visible outer layer. Carvings on sandstone are more detailed, while laterite offers stability. This combination allows towers to stand even after many centuries of exposure. Additionally, the structures at Kokher were built using a consistent system of block placement. Blocks were laid in horizontal courses, and weight was distributed evenly. The stability of the towers comes from this method. The carved faces, being part of the upper layers, do not compromise structural integrity because the carvings remain shallow and do not reduce the block's strength. Kokher's remote location has contributed to its relatively undisturbed condition, but it also means that archaeological work progresses slowly. Limited infrastructure, dense forest, and weather conditions limit field seasons. Despite these challenges, ongoing documentation continues to improve understanding of the site. Laser scanning, photogrammetry, and digital modeling help record the towers without disturbing them physically. The significance of the face towers extends beyond their aesthetic qualities. They provide evidence of architectural experimentation during a period of political change. Kokher represents a shift in architectural focus, where new forms were introduced to express royal authority. The face towers symbolize an early stage in the development of monumental facial imagery that later became a hallmark of the Khmer Empire. Visitors today experience the site as a peaceful landscape where ancient structures emerge between trees. The sound of the forest surrounds the ruins, and the towers appear in intervals along the pathways. The carved faces seem to observe from above, their expressions neutral and timeless. This atmosphere gives a clear sense of how the original builders integrated architecture with the natural environment. The face towers of Kokher provide insight into the early evolution of Khmer stone architecture. They show how ideas that later dominated Khmer temple design had earlier precedents. They demonstrate engineering skill, artistic consistency, and symbolic intention, and they remain one of the most important archaeological features at a site that provides a rare glimpse into a short but influential period of Khmer history. The giant wooden idol of Zeebrugge. The Zeebrugge idol is one of the most recognizable and debated artifacts linked to early Slavic religious practices. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, the statue presents a four-sided carved figure with human-like faces and symbolic motifs arranged in vertical tiers. It was found in 1,848 inches the Zeebrugge River in western Ukraine, and since then, it has become a key reference point for discussions about pre-Christian Slavic belief systems. The idol's form, its iconographic elements, and the context of its discovery continue to raise questions about ritual practices, cultural identity, and the development of religious structures in Eastern Europe. The statue is made from limestone rather than wood, despite being commonly described as a wooden idol in early popular accounts. The confusion arises because many Slavic religious objects from earlier periods were indeed wooden and did not survive. The Zeebrugge idol's limestone composition allowed it to endure. The artifact consists of a tall, narrow column, with 4 carved faces at the top. Below the faces are several registers of figures and symbols arranged around the column. Each side shows a different arrangement, but all follow similar structural principles. The idol is divided into 3 main sections. The upper section shows 4 faces wearing what appear to be headdresses. Some interpretations suggest these represent a deity with many aspects or directions. Others see them as 4 separate divine figures. The middle section includes standing human figures with outstretched arms, possibly referencing community or offering rituals. The bottom section contains a single figure crouched or kneeling, supporting the structure above. This tiered arrangement is often interpreted symbolically. representing different levels of the cosmos or layers of spiritual belief. When the idol was discovered in the mid-19th century, the region was undergoing significant archaeological interest, partly driven by emerging interest in national identity. The object was recovered from the riverbed by local villagers and soon attracted attention from scholars. At that time, written documentation of pre-Christian Slavic religion was limited. Most accounts came from Christian chroniclers writing after the conversion of Slavic populations, meaning that early interpretations of the idol relied heavily on comparative mythology and assumptions about ancient belief systems. Modern archaeology approaches the idol differently. Instead of treating it as a complete representation of Slavic religion, researchers analyze its iconography, sculpting technique, and geological composition. Tests confirm the stone is local limestone, consistent with materials available in the region. Tool marks show it was carved using iron tools, suggesting a date within the medieval period, rather than deep prehistory. This aligns with the idea that the statue might belong to the final centuries before Christianization, or possibly an early Christian-era ritual object used by communities maintaining older traditions. The faces at the top of the idol are carved in shallow relief. They share features such as wide eyes, straight noses, and simple mouths. The headdresses could indicate ritual status or symbolic clothing rather than literal headgear. The identical orientation of the faces around the column suggests a directional or cosmological meaning. Many cultures produce four-faced deities representing the cardinal points, cosmic balance, or divine oversight. While we cannot confirm the exact meaning for the Zeebruch idol, the arrangement suggests symbolic completeness or spatial awareness. The middle section contains more varied imagery. Some figures appear to hold circular objects, possibly representing the sun or offerings. Others hold what might be swords or ritual tools. Their postures, particularly the outstretched arms, point toward participation in ceremonial activity. The scenes are not narrative in the sense of telling a clear story. Instead, they seem to depict a symbolic community or group participating in a ritual structure that relates to the upper divine faces. The bottom figure stands or crouches in a supporting posture, with its hands raised. It occupies the lowest register and physically carries the upper sections. This imagery appears in multiple mythological systems, where deities or spirits support the world or serve as foundational figures. In some interpretations, the lower figure represents the underworld or base level of the cosmos. Others view it as a symbolic ancestor or guardian spirit. Regardless of interpretation, the bottom section clearly supports the vertical symbolism of the idol. Excavation around the discovery site did not reveal other ritual objects. The idol was found isolated, suggesting that it may have been placed intentionally in the river. Some researchers propose that it was submerged during the Christianization of the region as part of a deliberate act of abandonment or destruction of older ritual objects. Historical records from other regions describe similar events where wooden idols were thrown into rivers. While the Zeebruch's idol is stone, it may have been treated similarly. The date of the idol remains debated. Some early scholars argued for a prehistoric origin, but modern analysis suggests a later period, possibly between the 9th and 11th centuries. This places the statue in a transitional phase when Slavic communities were undergoing religious change. The presence of iron tool carving marks supports this timeframe. The style is not consistent with classical sculpture or Byzantine influence. Instead, it follows a regional tradition of simplified anthropomorphic representation. The significance of the idol lies partly in its survival. Most early Slavic religious objects were made from wood and did not last. The Zeebruch idol provides one of the few surviving examples of monumental sculpture associated with the region's pre-Christian traditions. Even if it does not represent all aspects of Slavic belief, it shows that communities used multi-layered symbolic structures in their ritual life. The three-tier design reflects a conceptual division of the world consistent with cosmological themes found across multiple Slavic and Indo-European traditions. From an archaeological standpoint, the idol provides evidence of skilled carving. The relief work is shallow but consistent. The edges of the faces, hands, and objects were shaped carefully. The column shape required the carver to work around all sides, indicating experience with three-dimensional planning. The size of the idol, nearly 3 meters tall, would have required several people to position it upright. It likely stood in an open ritual space or near a sacred location before being submerged. The idol's iconography also provides clues about community practices. The middle section's figures may represent communal participation in rituals. The outstretched arms appear in multiple places, suggesting gestures of offering or invocation. These images do not indicate centralized priesthood or elite ritual leadership. Instead, they align with community-based ceremonial activity typical of early Slavic societies. The top faces, while similar, show slight variations. Differences in hair patterns or clothing lines suggest that they may represent different aspects of one deity rather than four identical figures. Multi-aspect deities appear in other traditions, and the Zeebrugge idol could reflect a local adaptation of such concepts. The pillar form, divided into registers, suggests a structured cosmological worldview rather than random placement of symbols. Today, the idol is housed in a museum where it is preserved under controlled conditions. Replicas exist in other museums for study and display. Modern analysis includes 3D scanning, which helps document surface erosion and identify remaining tool marks. These scans allow researchers to preserve a digital model of the idol and examine its features without further damaging the stone. The idol remains a symbol of Slavic cultural heritage. Its meaning is still debated, but it continues to serve as a reference point for understanding how early Slavic communities expressed spiritual identity through material culture. It also highlights the challenges of interpreting artifacts without accompanying written records. Archaeologists must rely on style, tool marks, geographic context, and comparison with other cultures to form hypotheses about its significance. Despite uncertainties, the Zeebrugge idol remains one of the most important surviving artifacts from pre-Christian Slavic Europe. It provides direct evidence of symbolic carving and organized ritual imagery. Its endurance through centuries of environmental exposure and cultural change allows modern researchers to study a period of history that otherwise left limited material traces. The figure stands as a reminder of early communities' efforts to represent their understanding of the world through physical objects, using stone to convey ideas that extended across generations. The Cyclopean walls of Sarmizegetusa, Regia, Romania. Sarmizegetusa Regia lies deep in the Orăști Mountains of Romania, surrounded by forested ridges and steep valleys. Today, it is a protected archaeological site, but 2,000 years ago, it served as the political and religious center of the Dacian kingdom. The layout of the site includes stone fortifications, terraces, sanctuaries, and platforms arranged with deliberate planning. Among these features, the Cyclopean walls and the stone circles draw the most attention because they combine massive construction with astronomical alignment, forming a landscape that has been interpreted as both a fortress and a ceremonial center. The Cyclopean walls refer to the large stone fortifications built using massive limestone and sandstone blocks. These stones were shaped and placed without mortar, relying on weight and positioning for stability. The technique resembles other ancient methods used in Europe, but the Dacian version has its own characteristics. Many of the blocks are rectangular, with smooth surfaces and clearly defined edges. They form large retaining walls along the terraces that support temples and administrative areas. The walls served multiple functions. They stabilized the mountain slopes, created level platforms for construction, and marked boundaries for ceremonial zones. The blocks were quarried from nearby areas, shaped using iron tools available at the time, and transported using sledges, levers, and coordinated labor. Archaeological evidence shows repeated tool strikes on the surfaces, confirming the blocks were shaped by hand. Although erosion softened many edges, the structures remain largely intact, demonstrating careful engineering. The upper citadel area contains the most important structures. This space includes the large circular sanctuary, a wooden post ring set within stone foundations, and the famous andesite sun, a circular stone platform. These features contribute to the site's reputation as an astronomical center because their layout suggests intentional alignment with solar events. The large stone circle includes multiple concentric rings with evenly spaced wooden post holes. The arrangement resembles a calendar-like structure where shadows and alignments could have been used to track seasonal changes. The andesite sun platform, located nearby, is carved from a single massive block of andesite. Its upper surface is flat and divided into radial sections. Researchers consider it a ceremonial platform rather than a functional astronomical device, but its position in the complex and its shape indicate symbolic importance. The radial pattern suggests a connection to solar symbolism, which appears in many ancient cultures in the region. The Cyclopean walls surround several terraces leading up to these ceremonial spaces. The walls are built in a style known locally as murus dacicus, a distinctive Dacian construction method involving double stone, facings filled with horizontal wooden beams, and packed earth. In some areas, the original wooden beams have decayed, but impressions remain visible. This technique differs from classical Greek or Roman methods and reflects a localized engineering tradition. The combination of stone and wood allowed the walls to absorb shocks and maintain stability, which helped the structures survive for centuries. Archaeological studies reveal that the site developed over time. Earlier construction phases used smaller stones, while later periods introduced larger blocks with more uniform shaping. The Cyclopean walls belong to the later phase, when the Dacian kingdom reached its peak under King Burebista and later King Decebalus. At its height, Sarmi's Getusa Regia functioned as the administrative center for a network of fortified settlements across the region. Its walls and terraces reflect organized labor, supported by political authority. The stone circles and astronomical features sit within the same terraced landscape as the Cyclopean walls. Their placement suggests coordination between symbolic architecture and practical construction. The large circular sanctuary consists of an outer ring of large stone blocks forming a low perimeter wall. Inside this ring, wooden posts once stood in precise positions. Excavations mapped these post holes in detail, showing consistent spacing and diameter. The posts likely supported ritual structures or played a role in ceremonies. Their arrangement also creates sightlines toward the surrounding mountains and sky. Although interpretations vary, the layout seems well organized rather than random. Alignments between the wooden post rings and solar positions have been proposed, including solstice-related sightlines. These interpretations remain debated, but the deliberate spacing and circular form suggest some relationship with timekeeping or ceremonial observation. Unlike purely defensive structures, these circles do not protect the site. Instead, they appear designed for ritual or symbolic purposes. The Cyclopean walls connect these ceremonial spaces to the broader fortified complex. Multiple access routes, gates, and stairways pass through the terraces. Some stairways were carved directly into the bedrock. Others were built using stone blocks. The fortifications were not designed solely for military defense. They also organized movement and defined ceremonial boundaries. The walls controlled how people approached the sanctuaries, limiting access to specific groups during rituals. Evidence from the site includes pottery, metal tools, weapons, jewelry, and fragments of ritual objects. These materials help date the construction phases and confirm the presence of skilled craftsmen and organized workshops. Ironworking was advanced in the Dacian kingdom, and the tools used to shape the stones were consistent with the metal technology of the time. The presence of iron nails and clamps in some areas also shows a combination of stone and wood construction. One challenge in interpreting the site is the lack of written records from the Dacians themselves. Most historical information comes from Roman sources, which describe the Dacians as formidable opponents during the Roman-Dacian Wars. These accounts focus on military conflict rather than religious or architectural traditions. As a result, interpretations of the Cyclopean walls and stone circles rely heavily on archaeological evidence rather than textual descriptions. The Romans eventually conquered the Dacian kingdom under Emperor Trajan. After the conquest, many structures at Sarmi's Aegiatus Regia were destroyed or abandoned. Fire traces and collapsed beams indicate deliberate destruction of some areas. The ceremonial zones were no longer used, and the political center shifted. The Cyclopean walls survived partially because of their strong construction, but some sections collapsed due to loss of wooden supports. Over time, forests grew over the site, concealing much of the architecture until modern excavations uncovered it. By the time archaeologists began systematic study in the 20th century, the site had been affected by erosion, vegetation, and earlier disturbances. Excavations revealed the extent of the terraces, walls, and sanctuaries. Documentation continues today, using laser scanning, photogrammetry, and geophysical surveys. These methods help map foundations and detect subsurface features without damaging the remaining structures. The Cyclopean walls play an important role in understanding Dacian engineering. Their construction shows knowledge of geometry, weight distribution, and materials. The use of large blocks indicates organized labor and access to quarrying tools. The murus dacicus technique reveals a hybrid approach combining stone and wood for maximum stability. This method indicates that the Dacians understood how to build structures that could endure mountain weather and seismic movement. The stone circles and platforms also offer insight into ceremonial practices. While their exact functions are not fully known, the placement and design support interpretations related to ritual, timekeeping, or celestial observation. These structures likely served community gatherings or elite rituals connected to seasonal cycles. Their presence within the fortified complex suggests that religious activities were integrated into political life. Walking through the site today, the Cyclopean walls form the foundation of the terraces. The blocks appear weathered but still well fitted. Moss and vegetation cover portions of the stone, but the outlines remain clear. The stone circles form quiet open spaces surrounded by forest, giving a sense of how the sanctuaries may have felt during ceremonies. The andesite sun sits on its terrace, a solid reminder of the site's symbolic architecture. The Cyclopean walls of Sarmazegetusa Regia show how the Dacians combined engineering and ceremonial design. They built terraces strong enough to support temples, reinforced slopes with massive stone blocks, and integrated ritual structures into the overall layout. The site reflects an organized society with shared beliefs, technical skill, and the ability to shape the landscape for both practical and symbolic purposes. The ocean-facing statues of Acapana, Bolivia. Acapana stands at the center of the Tiwanaku archaeological complex on the Bolivian Altiplano, not far from Lake Titicaca. The site lies at an elevation of nearly 4,000 meters, where the air is thin and the climate is harsh. The Tiwanaku civilization flourished here long before the rise of the Inca Empire, creating stone monuments, temples, and administrative centers. Within this complex are several carved anthropomorphic statues made of andesite, a dense volcanic stone transported from quarries located far from the site. These statues appear to stand in deliberate positions around Acapana, many of them oriented toward the west, the direction of the distant Pacific coast. This alignment has led to questions about why these figures face that direction and what the orientation meant within Tiwanaku ceremonial life. Acapana itself is a large, stepped platform mound shaped roughly like a cross, with interior chambers, drainage canals, and a flattened summit that likely supported important ceremonial structures. The mound is built from a combination of adobe fill and stone retaining walls. The arrangement of rooms and canals suggests that water played a symbolic role at the site. The andesite statues found around Acapana are positioned in areas that appear to have been part of ritual pathways or public plazas. Their placement within this landscape forms one part of a larger ceremonial network. The andesite statues vary in height, but are generally around 2 meters tall. They depict human-like figures with stylized facial features, straight postures, and intricate carvings representing clothing, jewelry, and ritual objects. Many hold cups or staffs, which researchers interpret as ceremonial items. The carving style is consistent with Tiwanaku iconography found on monoliths throughout the site. The statues show detailed work using stone tools to create deep recesses for eyes, mouths, and geometric patterns. The fact that several of these statues face west has drawn interest because the Pacific Ocean lies hundreds of kilometers away across the Andes. The Tiwanaku civilization had trade networks linking the highlands to coastal regions. Archaeological evidence shows that marine shells, dried fish, and coastal products reached Tiwanaku through exchange. The west-facing orientation may reflect this connection, symbolizing routes that link the highlands to distant regions. However, there is no written record from Tiwanaku explaining the purpose of these alignments, so interpretations rely on archaeological context. Another explanation relates to Tiwanaku cosmology. In Andean belief systems, directions held symbolic meaning. The west was associated with the setting sun and with transitions between worlds. It represented movement toward the underworld or ancestral realms. Placing statues facing west may have formed part of ceremonies that honored deities connected with the sun's daily cycle. The statues' postures and the objects they hold support the idea that they participated symbolically in rituals marking these transitions. Some researchers emphasize the role of the Acapana platform itself. The structure incorporates water channels that carried runoff from rainfall across the stepped terraces. This controlled movement of water may have symbolized rivers or life-giving forces. The west-facing statues stood in areas where water flowed from the platform's summit. Their orientation may relate to the direction in which water left the structure, linking ceremonial meaning with natural elements. The statue's material also plays a role in their interpretation. Andesite was not locally available near Tiwanaku. The closest known source is across Lake Titicaca, requiring transport by raft and then overland movement. This effort indicates that the figures held significant importance. The difficulty of arranging their transport and placement suggests long-term planning and centralized organization. Placing them around Akapana in consistent positions reinforces the idea that they contributed to structured ceremonial activities. Archaeological mapping shows that the statues were not isolated. They formed part of a system involving gateways, plazas, and procession routes. Akapana's terraces lead toward specific points where the statues were found. This suggests controlled movement of people during rituals. The statues likely served as visual markers during these ceremonies. Their orientation toward the west could have guided participants' attention toward the setting sun, the distant mountains, or symbolic pathways leading away from the site. Some interpretations propose that the statues represent ancestors or elite individuals. Their upright postures and carved garments indicate status. If they served as ancestral representations, the westward orientation might relate to beliefs about the direction of ancestral journeys after death. In this view, the statue's fixed gaze toward the west symbolized continuity between the living community and the world of ancestors. Other statues at Tiwanaku face different directions, depending on their placement. The Gateway of the Sun, for example, faces east. This contrast reinforces that orientation carried meaning. East relates to sunrise, beginnings, and renewal, while west relates to endings, transitions, and passage. The deliberate placement of statues facing west around Akapana may have balanced the larger site's orientation system. Excavations around some statues revealed stone pavements, offering pits, and small artifacts such as ceramic fragments and stone tools. These items indicate ritual activity at their base. Offerings placed near the statues could have reinforced their symbolic role within ceremonies. The presence of burnt material suggests that fire may have been part of rituals conducted in these areas. None of these items, however, directly explain the westward orientation, but they confirm that the statues were central to ceremonial activity. The statues also reflect Tiwanaku's sculptural tradition. Carvers used hammerstones and chisels to shape andesite, creating deep lines and angular forms. The figures' facial expressions appear calm and neutral, consistent with Tiwanaku's artistic style. Clothing details, such as belts, tunics, and geometric patterns, match those found in ceramics and textiles from the region. These similarities help date the statues and associate them with specific phases of construction around Akapana. Over time, parts of the statues were buried or displaced due to erosion, earthquakes, and site modification. Some were later re-erected during reconstruction efforts. Archaeologists compare their current positions with early drawings and photographs to understand their original placement. Although the exact original orientation of every statue is not fully confirmed, consistent westward facing of several key statues suggests intentional design. Akapana itself remains only partially excavated. The full layout of the terraces and structures around it is still being documented. As more data is collected, interpretations of the statue's placement may become clearer. Research continues with digital scanning and ground-penetrating surveys to understand how the statues relate to hidden architectural features. Despite uncertainties, the west-facing alignment stands out because it connects architecture, ritual, and landscape. Tiwanaku builders created a ceremonial environment shaped by the surrounding mountains, the sky, and the movement of natural elements. The statue's orientation was part of this environment, whether directed toward trade routes, symbolic landscapes, or celestial cycles. The alignment reflects deliberate choices rooted in Tiwanaku cultural beliefs. Walking through the site today, the statues appear weathered but still retain their carved details. They stand against the background of the mountains, with the western horizon visible far in the distance. Their quiet presence contributes to Tiwanaku's atmosphere, where ancient structures blend with the open altiplano landscape. The combination of stone architecture, orientation, and terrain forms a setting that reflects how the Tiwanaku civilization understood space and meaning. The ocean-facing statues of Akapana highlight how ancient societies used orientation and placement to express beliefs. They show that directional symbolism was not limited to temples but extended to freestanding figures and ceremonial pathways. Although the exact purpose of their westward gaze remains uncertain, the statues provide a direct link to Tiwanaku's worldview, showing how architecture and ritual merged to create enduring symbols. The giant rock face of Chachapoyas. Peru. The cloud forests of northern Peru contain steep valleys, narrow ridges, and cliffs that rise sharply above the landscape. Deep inside these mountains once lived the Chachapoyas culture, a society known for cliff tombs, elevated settlements, and distinctive funerary traditions. Many areas remain difficult to reach because of dense vegetation and rugged terrain. Among these remote cliffs are several large stone faces carved directly into rock walls. These carvings vary in size and detail, but together they form one of the more unusual archaeological features in the region. The giant rock faces appear on vertical cliffs, where they are exposed to strong rainfall, shifting soil, and erosion, yet they remain recognizable. The carvings are not concentrated in a single location. They occur across multiple rock formations within the broader Chachapoyas territory. Some faces are isolated, carved into sheltered cliff pockets. Others appear near burial structures or high-elevation platforms. Most faces show simple anthropomorphic features: circular eyes, straight noses, and carved lines representing mouths. Some are sculpted with extended headdresses or geometric frames around the head. Their scale varies, with some reaching more than a meter in height, and others carved smaller into clusters. These carvings were made using local stone tools and basic chiseling techniques. The rock faces sit in limestone cliffs, which can be shaped with consistent striking. Tool marks remain visible on several carvings, showing shallow horizontal and vertical cuts used to outline the eyes and nose. Deeper recesses form shadow lines that help define the facial structure. The simplicity of the forms reflects the practical limitations of carving into cliff walls where access is restricted. The Chachapoyas use terraces, ropes, or temporary wooden scaffolding to reach these surfaces. The placement of the faces on exposed cliffs suggests symbolic or ritual importance rather than decoration. The Chachapoyas culture built funerary structures into cliff walls, including sarcophagi and burial niches. Many of these tombs contain mummified remains placed in seated positions. Rock faces carved near these burial spaces may reflect ritual beliefs about ancestors, protection, or the presence of guardian figures watching over the dead. The carved faces do not represent detailed portraits. Instead, they appear to symbolize general human forms or ancestral spirits, rather than specific individuals. Some carvings occur in areas without associated funerary structures. This suggests they may not be limited to burial contexts. In such cases, the faces may mark territorial boundaries, sacred places, or natural rock formations considered spiritually significant. The Chachapoyas culture is known to have constructed ceremonial platforms in elevated positions, often with wide views over valleys. Rock faces carved near these platforms may indicate ritual activity or symbolic communication with the landscape. Archaeologists studying these carvings must work within challenging terrain. Reaching some cliff faces requires climbing narrow ledges or descending slopes that become slippery during rainfall. Dense vegetation obscures many surfaces. Documentation requires detailed photography, mapping, and drone surveys. Because the carvings are spread across a wide area, establishing a unified interpretation is difficult. Each carving must be studied in relation to its immediate surroundings, including the presence of tombs, architectural remains, and natural features. The Chachapoyas culture did not leave written records, so interpretation depends on physical evidence. Spanish chroniclers describe the Chachapoyas as skilled in building cliff tombs and constructing structures in difficult terrain. Their funerary customs emphasized placement in elevated or inaccessible locations. The rock faces match this pattern. They appear in places where visibility from below is possible but access from above remains limited. This placement may indicate that the carvings were meant to be seen from certain angles during rituals or community gatherings. The simplicity of the carvings may reflect symbolic clarity rather than lack of skill. Representing human faces with minimal lines is common in Andean iconography. Many styles across the region use geometric simplification to convey identity or spiritual concepts. The Chachapoyas carvings follow this aesthetic. Circular eyes and straight noses are consistent across examples, suggesting a shared symbolic vocabulary. These repeated shapes allow archaeologists to link carvings across different locations, even when details vary. Some carvings show signs of modification or recarving. Tool marks overlap in certain areas, indicating that the faces may have been renewed over time. This suggests the carvings retained significance long after their initial creation. In several sites, The rock faces appear alongside later structures, showing continuity of importance. The persistence of these features implies that the Chachapoyas viewed the cliffs not only as burial grounds, but also as places of long-term spiritual meaning. Weathering affects the carvings differently depending on exposure. Some faces are deeply eroded, with only faint outlines remaining. Others are well preserved because their cliff positions offer natural protection. The limestone rock forms crusts over time, which can obscure or preserve details depending on moisture conditions. Archaeologists use techniques such as digital scanning to capture remaining features before further erosion occurs. The rock faces also contribute to understanding Chachapoya's settlement patterns. Cliff carvings occur near locations where people would have lived on terraces constructed along slopes. The distribution of faces helps indicate the extent of cultural presence across remote valleys. By mapping their locations, researchers can infer pathways, ritual areas, and community zones. The rock faces, therefore, serve as markers of cultural reach in landscapes that have changed significantly since the pre-Hispanic period. Because the Chachapoyas region lies within a cloud forest, environmental conditions shift rapidly. Heavy fog, rain, and humidity affect the rock surfaces. These conditions make preserving the carvings difficult. Conservation efforts focus on documentation rather than physical intervention. Removing vegetation or stabilizing rock surfaces risks damaging the carvings. Instead, researchers rely on recording and analysis to preserve knowledge of the faces. The meaning of the carvings remains open to interpretation. Some theories propose that they represent protective spirits watching over burial areas. Others suggest they symbolize ancestors who continue to occupy the landscape. Another possibility is that they serve as markers indicating sacred or restricted spaces. The lack of written explanation means that multiple interpretations can coexist. What is certain is that the carvings reflect a deep relationship between the Chachapoyas people and the cliffs that shaped their environment. Walking near these cliffs today, the rock faces appear gradually as vegetation shifts or sunlight hits the stone at certain angles. They do not dominate the landscape, but blend into it quietly. The expressions are simple, neutral, and still. Their presence adds a sense of human connection to the natural rock formations. For the communities that created them, these carvings may have represented continuity, protection, or companionship within the rugged environment. The giant rock face of Chachapoyas illustrates how ancient cultures integrated symbolic representation into natural features. It shows that the Chachapoyas did not build monumental sculptures in open plazas, but instead carved directly into the cliffs that shaped their daily lives. The faces remain subtle markers of identity and belief, preserved in the stone long after the settlements around them disappeared. The megalithic tombs of Marayur lies in the eastern edge of Kerala's Idukki district, not far from the border with Tamil Nadu. The region is known today for its sandalwood forests and dry valleys, but long before modern settlements, these hills were home to a megalithic culture whose stone monuments still survive across the slopes. Scattered across open fields, hilltops, and forest clearings are dolmens, large stone chambers, constructed from heavy slabs, arranged upright and capped with flat roofing stones. These monuments date back several thousand years and belong to a wider South Indian megalithic tradition that once extended across the Deccan Plateau and the Western Ghats. The dolmens of Marayur stand in clusters. Some appear isolated, while others form groups across open grasslands. Most contain 4 upright stones, supporting a single roof slab, forming a small chamber. The openings are narrow, often facing east. The stones used in their construction were quarried locally from available rock formations. Even though the design is simple, the effort involved in shaping and positioning the slabs is considerable. Each stone weighs several hundred kilograms. Moving them required coordinated labor using wooden levers, stone rollers, and carefully prepared paths. The people who built these structures belonged to a society that left no written records. Their identity is known mainly through archaeology. Excavations in South India show that megalithic communities practiced organized burial traditions that included stone circles, cairns, dolmens, and urn burials. The Marayur dolmens represent one part of this tradition. Their presence in the region suggests a stable population that lived in the surrounding valleys and interacted with broader cultural networks across the peninsula. The dolmens are constructed from granite or gneiss slabs, cut or shaped to fit together. The roof slabs are the most striking because of their size and weight. They rest on the upright stones with simple gravity-based stability. There is no mortar. The precision of the joining surfaces varies. Some dolmens show carefully aligned edges, while others have irregular gaps. This variation suggests that different groups built the dolmens over extended periods using slightly different methods. The entrances of many dolmens feature small square openings called portholes. These portholes are carved into one of the vertical slabs. The function of these openings remains debated. Some archaeologists argue that they allowed offerings, symbolic access, or airflow into the chamber. Others suggest they reflect ritual requirements related to the burial process. Regardless of function, the inclusion of portholes shows that the builders incorporated deliberate architectural elements into otherwise simple constructions. The landscape around Marayur contributes to the dolmen's preservation. The region consists of dry, deciduous forest, grassland, patches, and rugged hill formations. The stone slabs survive well in this environment. Soil erosion exposes some dolmens more clearly, while others remain partially buried. Vegetation sometimes covers the structures, hiding them from view. When cleared, entire clusters of dolmens appear, showing how widespread the megalithic presence once was. Archaeological study of these dolmens began in the early 20th century, but detailed excavation remains limited. Many dolmens were found empty, either because they were looted in the past or because they functioned as symbolic markers rather than burial chambers. Those that contain remains usually include pottery fragments, iron objects, beads, and bone fragments. These items help date the dolmens and provide insight into the communities associated with them. Radiocarbon dating from nearby megalithic sites indicates that the dolmens likely span a range from roughly 1000 BCE to the early centuries CE. The consistent orientation of many dolmens facing east suggests that the builders considered directional symbolism important. In many ancient Indian cultures, the east represents new beginnings, sunrise, and the cycle of life. Aligning dolmens toward the east may reflect beliefs related to life after death, or a symbolic connection to the rising sun. The repetition of this orientation across multiple sites indicates shared ritual practices rather than isolated design choices. The dolmens vary in size. Some chambers are large enough for a person to crawl inside, while others are smaller and clearly symbolic. The interior surfaces of most dolmens show no decoration. The builders did not carve inscriptions or elaborate motifs. They relied on simple, functional design. The absence of ornamentation contrasts with some megalithic traditions elsewhere in India, where burial chambers include engravings or stone circles. The Marayur dolmens appear deliberately minimal, suggesting a practical approach to ritual architecture. The distribution of dolmens across the landscape raises questions about community organization. The clusters suggest that groups of people shared burial grounds. These grounds often sit on elevated terrain, overlooking lower valleys. Such placement may reflect territorial markers or symbolic connections between the living community and the surrounding environment. The dolmens served as long-term monuments representing continuity across generations. One notable feature of the Marayur region is the association between dolmens and natural rock shelters. Some shelters contain rock art depicting human figures, animals, and geometric shapes. Although the rock art likely belongs to a different period, its proximity to the dolmens suggests that the landscape had long-term ritual significance. Communities living in different periods used the same hills for different purposes, indicating a layered cultural history. The construction of dolmens required cooperation. Moving large stone slabs without advanced machinery involved coordinated efforts from multiple individuals. The positioning of the slabs suggests knowledge of leverage, balance, and stone behavior. Builders would have shaped slabs by striking them with hammerstones. The flat surfaces seen on many dolmens reflect controlled stone fracture rather than random breakage. The uniform thickness of some slabs shows careful selection or shaping. Excavations near dolmens sometimes reveal traces of post holes or stone alignments. These features may indicate that additional structures once stood near the dolmens. Wooden posts, now decayed, may have marked ceremonial areas or supported temporary structures used during burial rituals. The presence of ceramic fragments indicates that pottery played a role in ceremonies. The pottery style includes red ware, black and red ware, and burnished surfaces typical of South Indian megalithic cultures. The dolmens also provide evidence of social structure. Not all community members received megalithic burials. These structures likely belong to specific groups, possibly representing kinship lines or individuals of particular status. The presence of iron tools or beads in some chambers suggests that those interred had access to valued items. The variation in dolmen size also suggests distinctions in significance or function. Over time, the dolmens became part of local folklore. Communities living in the region associated them with ancient spirits or ancestors. Some dolmens received modern offerings placed by visitors. These practices represent continuity in how people perceive symbolic stone structures. Although the meaning changed across centuries, the sense of the dolmens as markers of the past remains strong. Modern conservation efforts face challenges. Many dolmens sit on open land without protective barriers. Grazing animals, soil erosion, and vegetation growth affect the structures. Some dolmens collapse due to shifting soil or heavy monsoon rains. Efforts to document the dolmens include detailed photography, GPS mapping, and archaeological surveys. Digital reconstruction helps preserve information about the orientation, size, and placement of each dolmen. Research continues to refine understanding of the Marayur megalithic landscape. Comparisons with similar dolmens in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka help clarify cultural connections across the region. These comparisons reveal shared architectural principles and similar burial traditions. They also show variations that reflect local adaptations to terrain and available stone. The megalithic tombs of Marayur provide insight into a community that organized its relationship with death, memory, and landscape through durable stone structures. The dolmens show planning, effort, and symbolic intention. They represent generations of people who shaped the land through simple but enduring architecture. Even though their exact beliefs are not fully known, the structures speak through their form, orientation, and placement. Today, visitors walking among the dolmens experience a quiet landscape where ancient architecture merges with natural surroundings. The simplicity of the structures contrasts with the complexity of their history. Each slab, standing alone or grouped with others, reflects a cultural tradition that valued permanence and connection to place. The dolmens remain stable markers across the hills of Marayur, linking modern observers to the long-span presence of human communities in the region. The Cave Palace of Eskişehir, Crimea. Eskişehir sits on a long limestone plateau in the Crimean Mountains. From a distance, the plateau appears like any other high ridge, covered with sparse forest and rocky outcrops. But once you approach the cliffs, the openings become visible doorways, windows, carved chambers, and passages cut directly into the stone. For centuries, the site remained hidden among the hills, gradually covered by vegetation and soil. Only archaeological surveys in the 20th century revealed the full scale of what once existed here. A settlement carved almost entirely from the mountain itself. Among the many structures, the feature known today as the Cave Palace stands out for its size, complexity, and careful planning. Eskişehir was founded around the 6th century CE and expanded over the following centuries. It became a fortified settlement known as a cave city because most of its structures were hewn directly from the limestone plateau. The plateau rises steeply above valleys on either side, providing natural defenses. Its flat top supported houses, storage rooms, fortifications, workshops, and religious spaces. The rock itself served as building material, allowing inhabitants to create stable chambers without additional construction. The structure referred to as the Cave Palace is not a palace in the literal modern sense. Instead, it represents a complex arrangement of carved rooms, connected by corridors, stairways, and platforms that appear to have served administrative or elite functions. The structure includes large halls, niches, elevated seats, and access points leading to other parts of the plateau. The term palace is used because the interior spaces show a degree of organization and scale not present in ordinary residential chambers. The palace complex begins with a carved entrance along the cliff face. The opening leads into a corridor with smoothed walls and a slightly arched ceiling shaped by repeated tool strokes. Beyond the entrance is a large hall carved directly into the mountain. The hall includes benches carved along the walls, platforms elevated above the floor, and recesses that may have held wooden supports or decorative elements. The space is large enough to accommodate gatherings, suggesting it served as a meeting or reception room. The interior layout continues through a series of chambers that connect by carved doorways. Some rooms contain carved pillars left intentionally to support the ceiling. These pillars show careful shaping, with squared edges and flat faces. Their presence indicates the builders understood how much stone to remove without compromising structural stability. The The ceilings are flat or slightly curved, depending on the chamber's function. In certain rooms, narrow vertical slots cut into the walls may have supported wooden beams, shelves, or partitions. One of the most distinctive features of the cave palace is a chamber with elevated seats carved into the wall. These seats appear arranged for a small group, possibly for councils or administrative discussions. The chamber is not richly decorated, but its deliberate layout indicates planned use. The raised seats resemble carved thrones found in other ancient sites, though simpler in form. Their presence suggests a space where decisions were made or where elite individuals performed ceremonial duties. Windows cut through the outer cliff wall provide light to some rooms. These openings are narrow from the outside for defensive reasons, but widen on the inside to allow illumination. The placement of windows indicates careful planning. Builders position them to bring sunlight into specific chambers at certain times of the day. This use of natural light shows a functional understanding of the rock's orientation and daily movement of the sun. It also highlights the adaptability of a fully carved architectural system. The entire palace complex is positioned near the upper plateau, accessible through narrow passageways. One route involves a carved staircase leading from a lower terrace to the main entrance. The steps are worn from centuries of use but retain their shape. Other stairways descend sharply into storage rooms or connect to adjacent chambers. Some staircases disappear into collapsed rock, revealing how parts of the complex have changed over time due to erosion and seismic activity. The function of the cave palace remains debated. Some archaeologists interpret it as the administrative heart of the settlement, used by local leaders or officials managing trade, defense, and daily affairs. Others suggest that it had religious significance, with certain rooms functioning as ceremonial spaces. The absence of elaborate carvings or inscriptions makes interpretation difficult, but the scale and organization of the chambers indicate that the structure was not ordinary housing. Eski itself served as a fortified settlement and refuge. Its position in the Crimean Mountains allowed control over nearby valleys and trade routes. The settlement likely supported agricultural activities in surrounding fields and terraces. The cave structures protected inhabitants from weather and provided secure storage. The cave palace's elevated positioning within the settlement corresponds with a central administrative or ritual role. Archaeological evidence from surrounding areas includes pottery fragments, iron tools, grinding stones, and storage jars. These items show that the settlement had a complex economy. Workshops carved into the plateau contain traces of metalworking, weaving, and food preparation. The palace's proximity to these workshops suggests that it served as a central planning or oversight area. The settlement layout points toward organized community living rather than scattered habitation. Several defensive features surround Eski. These include carved watch posts, guard shelters, and defensive walls built on exposed parts of the plateau. The defensive system reflects periods of conflict in the region, particularly during late antiquity and the early medieval period. The cave palace may have played a role in coordinating defense or housing individuals responsible for monitoring the surrounding landscape. The limestone plateau also contains water channels carved into the rock. These channels gathered rainwater and directed it into cisterns. The cave palace includes access points to some of these channels, indicating that water management played a role in the structure's daily function. Carved drainage grooves on the floors of some chambers show that the builders took measures to prevent water accumulation during seasonal rains. Eski expanded during various periods, and later came under Byzantine and then local Crimean control. As political conditions changed, the settlement's use shifted. Some chambers were repurposed or abandoned. The cave palace appears to have remained in use for several centuries. However, by the late medieval period, population movement and new settlements in the region reduced the importance of Eski. Eventually, the site was abandoned, and natural processes began altering the entrances and chambers. Erosion remains one of the major challenges at the site. Limestone is susceptible to weathering from rain and wind, especially in exposed cliff faces. Some rooms have partially collapsed ceilings or eroded entrances. Vegetation grows in cracks, gradually prying apart stone fragments. Conservation efforts focus on stabilizing the most vulnerable openings and documenting interior chambers before further deterioration occurs. Detailed mapping, laser scanning, and photogrammetry help preserve knowledge of the cave structures even as physical loss continues. The cave palace is part of a larger network of carved spaces in Eski. Nearby structures include cave churches with carved altars and niches, storage rooms with carved arches, and residential chambers with simple hearths. Some chambers contain traces of frescoes from later periods, indicating that the site was continuously adapted across different cultural phases. The cave palace, however, remained primarily architectural rather than liturgical in its design, despite possible ceremonial elements. Visitors walking through the site today see open spaces where chambers once extended. The remains of smoothed walls, carved seats, and narrow passageways reveal how much effort went into shaping the mountain. The complexity of the cave palace shows that the inhabitants did not simply carve shelter. They created controlled environments with specific spatial organization. This indicates a high level of familiarity with stone carving and long-term habitation planning. The cave palace also provides evidence of social hierarchy. While ordinary dwellings are simpler, the palace's size, elevated location, and complex layout indicate a structure associated with authority. The architectural effort required to carve such a space implies organized leadership capable of coordinating labor. The chambers, with elevated seats, larger halls, and access routes, support this interpretation. Even without inscriptions or decorative elements, the structure communicates status through design. The significance of the cave palace lies not only in its scale, but also in its integration with the natural rock. Instead of building with cut stones or timber, the inhabitants chose to shape the mountain directly. This approach reduced the need for external materials, ensured stability, and allowed structures to blend with the landscape. The ability to convert a natural plateau into an architectural complex demonstrates a practical and resourceful approach to settlement planning. The giant stone arch of Wadi Rum, Jordan. Wadi Rum stretches across southern Jordan as a wide desert basin framed by sandstone mountains, towering cliffs, and long rock ledges shaped by thousands of years of wind erosion. The landscape looks simple at first glance, but the geology creates natural features that appear almost architectural. Among the formations scattered across the desert, one of the most well-known is the Stone Arch, a massive span of rock bridging two sides of a cliff. Although it is a natural formation, the arch has long been perceived as more than a geological curiosity. Its shape resembles a gateway, and its placement in an otherwise open desert gives it a presence that feels intentional. The arch rises from a sandstone ridge, where repeated cycles of erosion carved out recesses, hollows, and thin rock bridges. Over long periods, wind-blown sand cut channels into the stone, leaving behind the span that remains today. The structure appears stable despite its open form. Visitors can stand beneath it and see the sky framed by the curved rock above. The arch blends natural processes with a form that resembles deliberate construction, which is why it often becomes associated with ancient cultures that lived in and around Wadi Rum. For thousands of years, people moved through this desert. The Nabateans, the same culture that built Petra, left inscriptions and small architectural remains across Wadi Rum. Bedouin tribes used the area for seasonal grazing and travel routes. The desert's cliffs contain petroglyphs depicting animals, hunters, and abstract symbols. Although these cultural features do not directly connect to the arch, their presence in the surrounding landscape shows that the region was not empty. It supported communities who attributed meaning to natural formations. The stone arch likely served as a landmark for travelers. In a desert environment with few fixed points, such features would have helped guide movement. The arch's visibility across large distances suggests that people navigating through Wadi Rum may have used it as a reference point. Even without constructed significance, the formation would have stood out as a recognizable location for rest, gathering, or orientation. Archaeological surveys in Wadi Rum document a variety of structures built near natural formations. Small shrines, water collection points, and rock shelters adapted to natural cliffs appear throughout the area. The presence of these features suggests that natural formations were integrated into human activity rather than ignored. People used caves for shelter, stone ledges for lookout points, and shaded recesses for temporary camps. The arch fits this broader pattern, where natural shapes influenced movement and settlement without requiring modification. The arch's geological formation is straightforward. Sandstone layers erode unevenly, with softer layers wearing away faster than harder ones. When wind, temperature changes, and occasional rainfall remove enough material, unsupported sections collapse, leaving behind stable arches in rare cases. The arch at Wadi Rum formed through this gradual process. It does not show signs of human carving. Tool marks that would indicate human shaping are absent. The surfaces retain natural weathering patterns, including rounded edges and smoothing caused by wind-blown sand. Despite its natural origin, the arch aligns with the aesthetic values seen in nearby ancient structures. The wide opening, elevated span, and balanced shape resemble gateways found in Nabatean architecture. The Nabateans often built ceremonial or symbolic gateways marking the entrance to important areas. Although there is no direct evidence that the arch was incorporated into ritual practice, its form makes it easy to understand why later communities might have considered it a meaningful place. Historical accounts from Bedouin communities describe certain rock formations in Wadi Rum as places where social gatherings, meetings, or seasonal events occurred. These traditions do not always link to specific archaeological evidence, but reflect how natural features become social landmarks. The stone arch could have functioned similarly, providing a shaded or visually distinct spot for stopping during long desert crossings. The surrounding terrain reinforces this interpretation. Near the arch are flat rock surfaces that could have served as temporary encampments. Small depressions in the stone collect rainwater during rare storms, offering short-term resources. A natural gateway like the arch would have created a sense of orientation and might have been associated with routes leading toward the valley's water sources or grazing grounds. Wadi Rum also contains rock carvings from multiple time periods. These carvings appear on cliff faces, isolated boulders, and sheltered ledges. The themes include animals such as camels and ibex, human figures, and lines suggesting ownership or territory. While none of these carvings appear directly on the arch, their presence throughout the valley suggests that people paid attention to rock surfaces and used them for communication or symbolic expression. The absence of carving on the arch may indicate that it was respected or left untouched due to its significance. The stability of the arch depends on the integrity of its supporting rock. Over time, erosion will continue to affect the structure. Small fractures and surface weathering are visible, but the arch remains solid for now. Geological studies help monitor changes. Conservation does not involve reinforcing the arch, as interventions could harm its natural form. Instead, researchers document its condition and track weathering patterns to better understand how long it may stand. The arch's role today is mostly symbolic and geographic. It is a landmark for visitors, hikers, and researchers studying the desert environment. Its form continues to influence how people move through the area. Even without ancient inscriptions or constructed features, the arch conveys a sense of continuity between natural formation and human perception. It demonstrates how landscapes can shape cultural understanding without direct intervention. The significance of the giant stone arch lies not in its construction but in its presence. It represents how geological processes can produce forms that resemble human architecture. This resemblance influences how societies interact with the environment. Natural gateways, bridges, and towering cliffs often become focal points for cultural identity, ritual, or travel. The arch at Wadi Rum fits this broader pattern, standing as a stable feature in a shifting desert landscape. Walking beneath the arch today provides a view of the open sky framed by rock that has endured across thousands of years. The silence of the desert, the open valley stretching outward, and the shape of the stone create an atmosphere that feels both ordinary and symbolic. For the cultures that moved through Wadi Rum, the arch would have been part of a familiar landscape. For modern observers, it remains a reminder of how natural structures can take on meaning long after the forces that shaped them have passed. The giant stone arch of Wadi Rum is an example of the connection between natural formation and human interpretation. It shows how people respond to the landscape around them, using natural shapes as reference points or symbolic markers. Even without direct evidence of ancient ritual use, the arch contributes to understanding how communities throughout history have interacted with desert environments, shaping their lives around features that stand out in vast open terrain. The pyramid mounds of Shendi, Sudan. Shendi sits along the Nile Valley in central Sudan, not far from the better-known sites of Meroe and Naka. The region appears at first glance as open desert with shallow dunes and low ridges. But beneath the sand, and sometimes only partially visible above it, lie dozens of pyramid mounds belonging to ancient Nubian kingdoms. These mounds mark burial sites of rulers, nobles, and powerful families who lived during periods when the Kingdom of Kush controlled large stretches of the Nile corridor. Many of the pyramids remain buried, with only the tips or eroded edges appearing above shifting layers of sand. The pyramid mounds around Shendi belong to a broader tradition of Nubian pyramid building. Unlike the Egyptian pyramids, which are massive in scale and built from large limestone blocks, Nubian pyramids are steeper, narrower, and constructed with smaller, more manageable stone blocks. Their proportions give them a tall, sharp profile. Erosion and sand accumulation often reduce these structures to mounds that resemble natural hills, but excavations show the remains of carefully built stone architecture beneath. The pyramids served as funerary monuments. Each pyramid once stood above a burial chamber cut into bedrock or assembled from stone blocks. The chambers often contained offerings, pottery, jewelry, and artifacts associated with burial rituals. Many were looted in ancient times, but traces of these items remain in the sand around the sites. Some pyramids include chapels at their eastern side, where offerings and ceremonies would have taken place. These chapels contain carved reliefs, altars, or simple architectural layouts, depending on the period. Shendi's landscape preserves many pyramids that have not been fully excavated. The sand covers them partially or completely, creating irregular mounds that appear natural until exposed edges reveal cut stone. Archaeologists use surface surveys, probing, and ground-penetrating techniques to identify pyramid outlines beneath the sand. The density of mounds suggests that the area once formed an organized necropolis related to a nearby settlement or administrative center. However, the main city associated with this cemetery has not yet been identified with certainty. The construction of Nubian pyramids followed a consistent technique. Builders created a core of rubble or small stones and then faced the structure with triangular blocks to form the steep outer walls. The blocks were cut from local sandstone and transported short distances. Construction may have taken place over weeks or months rather than years, allowing more individuals to be buried in pyramid complexes. This method made pyramid building accessible to a broader segment of elite society compared to Egypt. The varying states of preservation at Shendi reflect differences in construction quality, erosion, and sand movement. Some pyramids still retain portions of their outer casing. Others survive only as collapsed piles of stone. Desert winds move sand across the site, burying some structures while revealing others. This constant shifting creates a dynamic environment for archaeological research. What appears buried one year may be partially exposed the next. The buried nature of many pyramids has both protected and concealed them. While collapsed stones and sand cover important features, they also prevent further erosion. Several pyramids with intact burial chambers show that the sand acted as a stabilizing layer. Archaeologists uncover sections carefully to avoid destabilizing walls that rely on sand pressure for support. Excavation requires gradual removal of sediment and reinforcement of exposed blocks. Artifacts from the Shendi region show connections with broader Kushite traditions. Pottery styles match those found at Meroe, indicating shared cultural practices. Small faience objects, beads made from stone or glass, and fragments of offering tables suggest ritual activity consistent with other Nubian burial sites. These objects help date the pyramids and place them within the historical timeline of Nubian kingdoms. The orientation of the pyramids follows a general east-west alignment. Chapels located on the eastern side face the rising sun, connecting burial rituals with solar symbolism. This orientation reflects the influence of earlier Egyptian practices, but with distinct Nubian adaptations. Nubian pyramids are smaller and grouped more densely, forming clusters that cover large areas of desert. The Shendi region contains multiple such clusters, each representing a different phase of use. The significance of these burial grounds lies not just in their architecture but in their relationship to ancient settlement patterns. Shendi stands along a key part of the Nile corridor, where trade routes, agricultural land, and political centers developed. The presence of pyramids indicates that this area held importance for elites. However, the city associated with the necropolis may lie buried under later structures or deeper sediment. Surveys indicate traces of habitation areas nearby, but full excavation remains limited. Archaeologists studying the Shendi pyramids focus on mapping and documenting the mounds before extensive excavation. Detailed measurements help determine the original height and proportions of the pyramids. Comparing these structures to those at Meroe and other sites shows variation in style and construction phases. This comparison helps build a clearer understanding of the political and cultural landscape of ancient Nubia. One challenge in studying the site is environmental. High temperatures, shifting sand, and occasional flash floods affect preservation. Wind erosion wears down exposed blocks, while sand movement may uncover or bury features unpredictably. Conservation strategies aim to stabilize exposed structures without altering the natural landscape. Protective coverings, selective excavation, and minimal intervention help preserve the remains for long-term study. Local communities living near the site maintain knowledge of the pyramids as part of their landscape. Although the structures are ancient and no longer actively used for ritual, their presence shapes cultural identity. Visits to the area reveal a mixture of natural desert, exposed stone, and partially visible structural outlines. The quietness of the region amplifies the sense of history embedded in the sand. The pyramid mounds of Shendi demonstrate how large ceremonial landscapes can lie hidden beneath shifting environments. They reveal a tradition of pyramid building distinct from the Egyptian model but equally important in understanding African ancient architecture. The presence of dozens of buried pyramids indicates organized ritual practice and long-term occupation. Even in their eroded state, the mounds show the architectural ambition and cultural identity of ancient Nubia. Walking across the landscape today, the mounds appear as low forms rising from the desert floor. The edges of sandstone blocks sometimes break the surface. With each shift of sand, more details appear or disappear. The combination of visibility and concealment creates an ongoing mystery, where archaeology slowly reconstructs a past shaped by climate, culture, and time. The Shendi pyramids remain quiet structures, shaped by erosion, but still marking the presence of communities that once placed great meaning in their construction. They form part of a larger historical pattern in which desert landscapes hold memories in the form of architecture hidden beneath the sand. As research continues, the buried pyramids will gradually reveal more about the people who built them and the beliefs that shaped their world. The colossal Lion Temple of Sulaymaniyah, Iraq. The mountains surrounding Sulaymaniyah, in the Kurdistan region of northern Iraq, contain layers of archaeological history stretching back thousands of years. These mountains preserve caves, terraces, and ancient settlement traces from cultures that lived here long before written records described the region. Among the finds reported from the wider Sulaymaniyah area are several colossal carved lions, monumental stone sculptures that once guarded an ancient sanctuary. Their original positions are lost due to erosion, looting, and later construction, but the surviving fragments show that they belong to a large ceremonial structure, likely a mountain temple built during the late Bronze or early Iron Age. The lion sculptures are carved from heavy limestone blocks. Even in their fractured state, the scale of the pieces is immediately noticeable. Individual fragments measure more than a meter in height, and complete lions would have stood several meters tall. The carvings depict stylized lion bodies with muscular forms, wide paws, and carved manes arranged in patterned rows. These features match the artistic traditions of the ancient kingdoms that controlled this region, including the late Assyrian and earlier Hurrian states. The lions served a symbolic and protective role, signaling the presence of a sacred site. Although the exact location of the original temple remains uncertain, the lions were discovered near highland passes where ancient routes once connected lowland Mesopotamia with the upland valleys. Archaeologists studying the surrounding terrain suggest that the sanctuary may have been built at a viewpoint or a natural terrace overlooking the plains. Such locations were commonly selected for mountain temples dedicated to protective deities, storm gods, or regional guardian spirits. The monumental lions would have marked the entrance to the sacred precinct, reinforcing the boundary between ordinary, landscape, and ritual space. The fragments show consistent carving technique. Tool marks indicate the use of iron chisels, with repeated vertical and diagonal strokes shaping the bodies. The eyes, jaws, and paws were carved with shallow recesses to create contrast when sunlight struck the stone. The lions likely stood on rectangular pedestals carved from the same limestone. These bases may have supported ceremonial gateways or flanking walls. Although none of the architectural elements survive intact, carved stone blocks found in the region suggest that the sanctuary included more than just statues. The lion as a symbol has deep roots in Mesopotamian culture. In both Sumerian and Assyrian traditions, lions represented power, protection, and royal authority. Temples, city gates, and palaces often displayed carved lions to signal strength and divine guardianship. The lions from the Sulaymaniyah region fit within this tradition, but their location in a remote mountain landscape makes them distinct. Instead of standing in an urban setting, they guarded a sanctuary far from major cities, suggesting a different ritual function, possibly tied to nature worship, mountain deities, or seasonal ceremonies. Archaeological surveys in the region document multiple highland sanctuaries used by ancient cultures. These include open-air temples, stone platforms, and shrines carved into rock faces. Many lie in areas where springs emerge from cliffs or where natural terraces overlook wide valleys. The lion fragments may belong to such a tradition. If the sanctuary stood near a spring or elevated plateau, the setting would have enhanced its ritual importance. Mountain sanctuaries often served as places for offerings, seasonal rituals, and gatherings that reinforced community identity. The discovery context of the lions is complicated by modern disturbance. Farmers, construction projects, and erosion revealed the fragments gradually over decades. Some pieces were relocated before proper documentation occurred. This makes reconstruction difficult. Researchers rely on stylistic analysis and regional comparison to place the lions within a broader archaeological framework. The carving style resembles examples from the Assyrian frontier, where local cultures blended Mesopotamian artistic forms with indigenous traditions. Other stone fragments found in the same region include partial column bases, carved panels, and architectural blocks. These materials indicate that the sanctuary may have included a small temple building or altar platform. The absence of large standing ruins suggests that most architecture was made of mud brick or perishable materials that have not survived. Stone elements, such as the lions, served long-term symbolic purposes, while the rest of the structure evolved or decayed over time. The positioning of the lions, inferred from surviving fragments, suggests they stood in pairs. This arrangement is common across ancient Near Eastern architecture. Pairs of lions flanking an entrance symbolize balance, protection, and the threshold between sacred and secular spaces. Whether the sanctuary served a local community, a regional kingdom, or a network of mountain settlements, its monumental entrance would have conveyed authority and spiritual significance. Environmental conditions in the mountains contributed to the erosion of the lions. Limestone weathers quickly under harsh winds, temperature shifts, and seasonal rain. The broken edges, softened profiles, and missing sections indicate long exposure. Moss and mineral deposits cover portions of the stone. Despite this weathering, enough carving remains to study the original form. Digital scans allow archaeologists to reconstruct the lions virtually, modeling how they might have appeared in their original setting. Local traditions sometimes reference ancient temples or statues in the mountains, describing them as remnants of forgotten kings or protective spirits. While these stories do not provide direct archaeological evidence, they preserve cultural memory of ancient structures that once stood in the region. Communities living closest to the discovery sites often know where fragments were originally found. Their accounts help researchers identify potential sanctuary locations for future excavation. The terrain around Sulaimaniya includes narrow valleys, ridges, and passes that would have been strategic in ancient times. A sanctuary placed at a natural overlook could have served both spiritual and practical functions. It may have acted as a landmark for travelers or as a gathering point for seasonal rituals. The presence of colossal lions would have communicated the importance of the location and the power of the deity or ruler associated with it. Archaeological excavations near the lion fragments reveal layers of habitation extending through multiple periods. Pottery shards, iron tools, and small figurines indicate occupation across the Bronze and Iron Ages. However, no large settlement has been identified near the Lion Temple. This suggests the sanctuary operated independently from major towns, functioning as a regional ritual center rather than an urban temple. Such centers served dispersed communities, drawing people from surrounding valleys for ceremonies and offerings. Future research aims to locate the exact position of the sanctuary. Remote sensing, satellite imagery, and drone mapping are used to identify unusual stone alignments or terraces in the mountains. Areas with exposed bedrock, natural springs, or elevated ridges are likely candidates. While the original temple may no longer stand, its foundation stones and associated artifacts may still be buried under soil and vegetation. Today, the lion fragments are preserved in regional museums or secure storage facilities. Their condition reflects both the difficulties of preserving outdoor monuments and the importance placed on protecting them from further damage. Displaying the lions allows the public to understand the depth of ancient culture in the region, while scholars continue to study their stylistic and symbolic significance. The colossal lion temple of Sulaimaniya represents a chapter of ancient history that remains partially hidden. The lions themselves provide a glimpse into a ceremonial landscape shaped by mountain terrain, regional culture, and long-standing artistic traditions. They show how communities used monumental symbols to mark sacred places, even in remote environments. Although the sanctuary is no longer intact, the surviving fragments allow archaeologists to reconstruct elements of its purpose and meaning. Walking near the discovery sites today, the mountains appear quiet and undisturbed. The landscapes are wide and open, interrupted only by rocky ridges and steep cliffs. The lions once stood here as guardians, framing an entrance that looked out over the valleys below. Their presence, even in fragmentary form, shows how ancient societies left lasting marks on the terrain, marks that continue to re-emerge from the soil as reminders of the region's deep history.